Good morning, everyone. The Wednesday, December 5th, 2018 meeting of the Nags Head Board of Commissioners is called to order. We always start with a moment of silence. This morning, I'd like to note that today is a National Day of Mourning in honor of, or on the passing of the senior president, George Bush. I'd ask during the moment of silence, I will, that we keep the members of the Bush family in our thoughts as we have a moment of silence. So if you'll please join me, thank you. Thank you. And now if you will stand as you're able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda, and a motion would be in order.
Mayor, I make a motion to adopt the agenda and removing item 8 from the consent agenda for further information, please.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda with the consent agenda amended as indicated. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. We have an agenda. The next item is public comment. I will turn this over to our attorney, Robert Hobbs. I do want to note that if you are here to speak on the proposed tent or beach equipment ordinance, which is item H1, the appropriate time to comment on that is now during the public comment. Mr. Hobbs.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, speakers are asked to direct their comments to the full board rather than to individual commissioners or staff members. Discussion between speakers and members of the audience will not be permitted. The board ordinarily does not answer questions during public comments. So if you'd like to make public comment, if you will come forward and state your name and address, please.
Good morning. My name is David Ferguson. I am with Carolina Designs Realty, and I just want to thank the committee that worked on this ordinance and working with the stakeholders. It looked to be well balanced, and I appreciate the effort that y'all put forward on that. So that's just come up to say another thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, then we'll go ahead and close the time for public comment.
All right. Thank you very much, Robert. The next item on our agenda is a long list of recognitions and presentations. So, Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, sir. We'll start off with the interim fire chief, Shane Height, who has a recognition of life-saving recognition for some of our staff and county staff.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'd like to ask several people that were involved in this to come forward if they would. Firefighter Chris Day, Tanner Mann, Trey Simmons. Do you all want them to go over to the other side?
Actually, I think it's okay behind you. Why don't we
Okay.
do it behind you?
Okay.
I'm changing the plan, so
right.
let's just do it that way. Thank you.
And Reserve Firefighter Skyla Lamberto Egan. Also with me today is EMS Chief Jenny Collins, who will be recognizing at least one of her employees, Ryan Farrow, and two could not be with us today, Bree Anderson and Jason Arney from Dare County EMS. The Nags Head Fire Life Safety Recognition Award is to recognize fire department staff who have displayed acts of heroism above and beyond the call of duty. I would like to recognize Master Firefighter Chris Day, Firefighter EMT Trey Simmons, Firefighter EMT, and Reserve Firefighter Skyla Lamberto Egan for their actions on an emergency incident on August 9th, 2018. I would also like to recognize personnel from Dare County EMS. Ryan Farrow, Bree Anderson, and Jason Arney, who worked seamlessly with fire personnel for a successful outcome. The parents of our patient shared this letter with us that I'd like to share today. We are forever grateful and thankful for your firefighters and EMTs who responded to our desperate 911 call on the morning of August 9th. It is a morning we will never forget. We thought we had lost our baby Ethan that morning. Within minutes, he had snuck out the front door and made his way into the backyard swimming pool of our vacation rental. By the grace of God, our son Harper noticed him floating in the pool, which caused a chain reaction of family members pulling him out of the pool and starting CPR. He was blue and lifeless with no pulse. When the EMTs and firefighters arrived, Ethan was able to receive the immediate intervention and care he needed. Your team's strength, care, confidence, assurance, and steadiness left us feeling at peace, even though we did not know what long-term health effects would be or if he would be alive. We knew he was getting the care that he needed. The life or death decisions you have to make are admirable and brave. After 2 days in the Children's Hospital ICU in Norfolk, Virginia, he was discharged with no side effects. No bruising, no broken ribs, just a tiny scrape on his nose. We are thankful for the service of the Nags Head firefighters in Dare County EMS, EMTs, and the police department. You are all heroes and will be a chapter in Ethan's testimony for the rest of his life. Thank you again from the bottom of our hearts, Miss Martha Beard. I think it goes without saying these guys did a wonderful job that day. A picture is on the screen of the family the week that they were on vacation. They couldn't be here with us today. They were not able to travel the distance. But I'd like to offer a thank you to all that were involved that day, and thank you for allowing us to be here today. I'd like to present our Life Safety Award that is a pin that goes on their uniform coats. I think Chief Collins has something similar for her personnel. Again, thank you for letting us be here today.
Yes.
We appreciate the
Thank you,
opportunity.
absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, I believe you've had some conversation with the young boy's father.
I have. I have had occasion since this awful incident to speak with the father of the young man who almost drowned, and that family is incredibly appreciative of the work that our first responders did on that day, of course. And the young man is reported to be without ill effect. Of course, the family was traumatized, of course, and are dealing with that. But in that conversation, there was some concern about access to swimming pool facilities at rental houses like the one that they were in, that critical facilities like the fence, the gates, in some cases alarms on doors which lead directly to pools, need to be maintained in order for those facilities to be safe, in order for children not to be able to access, small children like Ethan, to be able to access the pool in the way that he did. And after some research by our staff, including the building inspector, it was determined that the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act, while it addresses facilities in rental houses, does not address the swimming pool. And so we have prepared a resolution, which I will now offer for the board's consideration. And so if you'll bear with me for just a moment. This is a resolution requesting the North Carolina Legislature to amend the rules governing swimming pools. Whereas tourism in North Carolina generated record visitor spending of $23.9 billion in 2017, supporting 225,000 jobs. And whereas the growth of the tourism industry in our state has led to greatly expanded market of privately owned residences that are rented for vacation, leisure, and recreational purposes. And whereas the popularity of swimming pools as amenities at residential vacation rentals has increased dramatically. And whereas drowning is the #1 leading cause of unintentional death for children ages 1 through 4, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And whereas from 2013 to 2015, there was an average of 351 pool or spa-related drownings reported per year involving children younger than 15 years of age. And whereas 76% of those reported drownings from 2013 to 2015, according to a May 2018 Consumer Product Safety Commission report, involved children younger than 5 years of age. And whereas young children are inquisitive and impulsive and lack a realistic sense of danger, which makes swimming pools particularly hazardous for households with young children. And whereas the use of protective measures such as fences and gates surrounding swimming pools has decreased the incidences of drowning-related deaths, and whereas consumers expect their rental property to be clean and safe, and whereas the maintenance of pools and their enclosures and gates are integral to a safe environment for vacationers of all ages. And whereas North Carolina's Vacation Rental Act protects consumers who rent vacation property for fewer than 90 days. And whereas currently the Act includes several provisions required by the landlord to provide fit premises, including providing operable smoke detectors. And whereas the Act unfortunately does not currently include vital regulations regarding swimming pool and swimming pool enclosure safety and maintenance. Now therefore be it resolved that the Nags Head Board of Commissioners request the North Carolina Legislature to amend North Carolina General Statute 42A-31, titled Landlord to Provide Fit Premises, to include language that requires pools and the required enclosures to be maintained in good and safe working order and regularly inspected and promptly repaired, adopted this 5th day of December 2018. Having heard the resolution, a motion would be in order.
Mayor, move to adopt by acclamation.
Okay, thank you. Have a motion and a second to adopt by acclamation. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. And again, once again, before they leave, thanks to those first responders who were so critical. Cliff?
Mr. Terry Gray to come up and give the board a recap of the Dare County Toy Run that was held on September 22nd.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you letting me come up here and talk today and tell you about the fun we have. And it's a pleasure to see such things like the first responders this morning. That just says how much they are of value to our community, and we thank them all very much. Mayor, thank you. Board of Commissioners, thank you. And Town Manager, thank you. The shining star today is the Nags Head Police Department. That's who I'm here to recognize and say thanks to. I'll give you a little history about our toy run. We were founded in 2016, and this is the 3rd year that we've done this. We're a 501(c)(3). We founded it as the Dare County Motorcycle Toy Run. We've changed our name now, and we are the Dare County Motorsports Charity Group. We did that so that we could expand and get into different horizons and make a little more money to help the children. First year that we operated, we raised $14,000. We helped 400 kids. The second year, we raised $25,000, and we helped 573 kids. All this stays in Dare County. This past year, we raised just under $32,000. We're very happy about that. We changed our name, like I told you, and We also had some other changes. We partnered with the First Flight Society. That helped to expand our reach a little bit to some different groups. And we had the distinct honor of having Johnny Waters, a local artist, do a theme song for us this year, which you'll see when we play the video. Also, we branched into establishing 3 educational scholarships this year. One for Manio and the mainland, one for Hatteras Island, and one for the northern beaches that we're going to hopefully have children take part of and get a little educational help as far as money to them. So we're excited about that too. Without any further talk, I'll go ahead and ask if we can play the video. I think y'all will enjoy this. You got it loud? Needs to be loud.
I'm not gonna let them catch a midnight rider.
I thought it was very appropriate to have that song. I didn't pick it, Johnny Waters picked it, but it kind of, has the same feeling that I do. There's always one more silver dollar out there for the kids. I like that. I want to thank Nathan Lawrenson. He is the fellow that does the drone footage for us and the photography. And he always does a great job for us. Most of our stuff is volunteer. All of our members on our boards are volunteer. We had the distinct honor this past year of being awarded the Governor's Award of Excellence for Volunteerism for our board, and we were real excited about that. This year, we have branched out and we've partnered with Michael Tillett, which is OBX SS, and with Richard Quidley. And Mayor, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask Michael to come up and share some very exciting news that we're working on.
Okay.
This is going to be a phenomenal custom rod and car show this year that's going to be throughout Dare County. As a matter of fact, it happens May, the 3rd, Mike? May 3rd and 4th. They've already booked over 400 rooms in Dare County. And as a matter of fact, the latest update that I got is there's one motel up to the northern part of Dare County that only has 5 rooms left. They've practically booked the whole motel. So before I do the presentation to the police chief, I'd like to ask Mike to come up and say a couple of words about this event, if you will.
Thank you very much for letting me come up and let you know what's going on about this festival. Like Terry was saying, we're doing a OBX Riding Custom Festival the first weekend in May 2019. And it's all for charity. We're working with 2 charities, which is Terry's charity is one of them, the Toy Run, and the other one is the Children and Youth Partnership of Dare County. After all expenses, all the profits will go to those 2 charities to be split evenly. Like you were saying, we've got an overwhelming response from all over the country and Canada. Right now, we've got cars coming in from Florida, Illinois, New York, Canada, Minnesota, Indiana, all coming to this event to help support this charity. And like you're saying, we've got 4 hotels that's practically booked. One of them's already booked. And it's just going to be a good economic boost to the economy on the first weekend of May. Most of these people that's coming in, they're coming in on Tuesday and Wednesday for a event that's starting on Friday. And I've already had some of the guys and ladies ask about extending the event for 2020 for a few more days. But that's what we've got going on, and I'm trying to go around and let everyone know what's going on. And I met with the Sheriff's Department, and he's going to get me hooked up with the rest of the police departments in January so I can give them a formal assessment of what's going on, where most of the events are going to be. We're doing something in Manio, Nags Head, Kidover Hills, and Kitty Hawk, so it'll be spread out all over the county. And the attraction to all the people coming in to patronize all these businesses, we're going to do some type of an award to them if they go to every one of these cruising spots. And we'll end up with a drive-in theater at the event site in Nags Head on Saturday evening. So just wanted to give you a little rundown on what was going on.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that, Mike.
Like I said, this was the 3rd year we've done the Toy Run with the help of the law enforcement agencies in Dare County. Sheriff's Department heads it up, Nags Head's a vital part, and all the municipalities are. We've not had a single incident in any of the 3 events. Mr. Mayor, if I could, I'd like to call up your police chief and present a plaque to him, if I may.
Absolutely.
And I'm just going to say my normal line. These guys make y'all look good.
Yeah, they do. We know.
Chief, we appreciate your help. We appreciate you keeping us safe and managing the traffic. And take that small token of our appreciation, but we love you to death. You do a great job.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this special event, and look forward to many more years to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Terry. We really appreciate your event. I know that that's a great passion for you, and that you put a lot of effort into that. And not only the benefit it provides for the children, but the way it beautifully unites what people love to do, the tourism, promoting all the wonderful sites in Dare County. I know Mike's event will do the same, and so we're excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cliff?
Yes, sir. We have Deputy Town Manager Andy Garman to come forward for a recognition for our planner, Holly White.
Holly, if you would come forward, please. How you doing today? Holly is the town's principal planner. As you know, she's been with the town since late 2014. We are certainly excited to honor Holly for a recent award she received from the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. It's their Regional Adaptation Leadership Award. The award was presented to Holly on October 30th, 2018 at the 2018 Carolinas Climate Resiliency Conference in Columbia, South Carolina. According to the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, this award recognizes individuals who have distinguished themselves in the climate change adaptation field through exceptional leadership. It recognizes the fact that deliberate, proactive adaptation, preparedness, and resilience building is a change process, a deviation from business as usual, and a courageous act of doing something new and different. At the heart are individuals who make this change happen, sometimes with very few resources. The RALA Award recognizes distinguished adaptation leaders who approach their work in a strategic, sophisticated, well-informed, inclusive, and effective manner. As you know, Holly is our primary connection with Sea Grant, and she was the project leader on our VCAPS project, and I won't try to say the acronym for you. We conducted over the last several years, we engaged Nags Head stakeholders in a climate adaptation scenario planning exercise. It's primarily a community engagement exercise to talk about climate adaptation, to sort of broaden the community's input in adaptation planning and see what the community feels like is our major challenges that we're going to need to deal with over the next 20 to 50 years. Certainly, Holly was recognized with this award for her role in leading that effort. She is our primary connection with the North Carolina Sea Grant, and they have worked together exploring pathways for resiliency planning through grant funding and educational outreach, which will benefit Nags Head and will also broaden the capacity for resiliency planning to be used by other communities as well. According to ASAP, Holly assembled a team across town departments that included planning, engineering, public works, and septic health. Her leadership has fostered integrated interdisciplinary resilience. Grounded in shared values, her work has strengthened support and capacity for sea level rise planning. And I think one of the main reasons Holly received this award was her willingness to share the information that we had learned and reach out to other communities and to the state and other organizations in sharing the information and really helping to broaden the overall capacity for this type of work. We are certainly pleased to recognize Holly for the achievement and hope that we continue to benefit from her passion and enthusiasm as we continue to tackle these challenges. So thank you. And Holly was given this award. She brought it with her to show the board, and we appreciate your help and your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. We appreciate your leadership in that important area, and it's pretty awesome recognition. Thank you. Cliff?
Public Works Director Ralph Burrell to come forward to recognize some new employees.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. It's my pleasure this morning to present Preston Connor Twitty as one of our new facilities maintenance technicians. He likes to go by Connor. Connor, born and raised in Dare County in Mans Harbor. Graduated Manio High School and then went to COA and got a degree in culinary school. So any party that we're going to have, we're going to call on him to make the hors d'oeuvres. So some of his hobbies are, of course, he likes to cook, he likes to fish, he likes to hunt, and he also likes to collect comic books. So Preston, thank you for being here. And, hey. The next person I'd like to present is Seth Gray. Seth, another homegrown person that we have here. Seth went to First Flight High School, graduated from First Flight High School, went to Cape Fear Community College, and got an associate's degree in science. He also has another connection to Nags Head. He's engaged to former Darl Gray's granddaughter. And you heard his future father-in-law speak about the toy room. Seth also, he likes to weight lift, as you can see. He also likes sports, played football throughout high school, and he also likes the outdoors and likes to hunt and fish. So I'd like to present Seth Gray.
Andy Garman come back to introduce someone that you all know, our new engineering tech, Kate Jones.
Where is Kate? She's hiding back here. So we are certainly pleased to welcome Kate Jones to the Nags Head staff in the position of engineering technician. She started earlier in November. Many of you know that Kate served on the town's planning board since, I think, March of 2015. And she was also on the advisory committee for the Focus Nags Head Comprehensive Plan during the course of that process. So she brings a lot of knowledge of our codes and ordinances and our town's future vision as a staff person. She was most recently the Northern Sites Manager for the NC North Carolina Coastal Reserve, working for Division of Coastal Management. She also worked in Nags Head Woods, as you know, for 6 years, and brings a lot of local knowledge and experience. She's a landscape architect. She has a master's in landscape architecture and an undergraduate degree in biology. She is proficient in computer-aided design and GIS. She has also done freelance work as a landscape architect. She'll be helping us manage our stormwater program, which you'll hear more about later, and you'll see the effects of some of her work already in that presentation. Certainly a great loss to the planning board, but a huge gain for the town, and hopefully an overall gain as we benefit from her knowledge on a daily basis. So we welcome Kate Jones to the town staff.
Great.
Deputy Fire Chief, come forward and introduce our newest firefighter.
Good morning once again, Mayor and Commissioners. Please join me in welcoming our newest firefighter EMT, Trevor Tilley, to the town of Nags Head. We're also pleased this morning to have his family with us, Mr. and Mrs. Troy Tilley. You may recognize Troy as the fire chief in Kildover Hills, so we appreciate them being with us today. Trevor comes to us by way of the Collington Fire Department, where he worked for about 4 years before leaving them to come to us, which we're grateful to have him. Trevor, in addition to his firefighter 2 and EMT skills, he's a certified driver operator for aerials. He's working on his driver operator for the pump series. He's a fire instructor, a fire life safety educator, and is emergency vehicle driver certified. Trevor loves the outdoors, he hunts, he fishes, and he just fits right in. About his first day here, we had a 2-day training event that he wasn't quite working yet. He was to start the week after, but he came and watched just to see how things worked, and I think he thoroughly enjoyed it and hasn't missed a beat at all. Like I said, Trevor's dad's a fire chief in Kildover Hills, so I think firefighting's in his blood. Trevor, we look forward to a long time of you working for the Nags Head, and we're glad to have you.
Ask Interim Police Chief Perry Hill to come forward to recognize our police officer and animal control officer, Mr. Jimmy Pierce.
Mr. Mayor, good morning, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. It's not like Jimmy needs a lot of announcement. Everybody pretty much knows Jimmy from around here, but it's my pleasure to come before you today to recognize Police Officer First Class Jimmy Pierce for 5 years of service with the town. Jimmy came to our agency after retiring from ALE with 30 years of service in law enforcement, to include time with the Hertford County and Dare County Sheriff's Office. We joked with him that the ink didn't dry on his paperwork, being that he retired from the state on Friday and started with Nags Head on Monday. Jimmy does bring a wealth of knowledge that he brings to us, and he's not one that doesn't put it to use. Jimmy is assigned to animal control, but is very active in our department in covering shifts, taking calls, and giving advice to our younger officers. He is one of the department's general instructors and specializes in firearms and driving instruction as well. Jimmy is not one to sit around and ask someone to complete a task if he is able to take care of himself. He's been assigned to the maintenance of the firing range and rarely asks Public Works to do anything that he can do himself. I believe Ralph and Charlie has given him extra sets of keys to the mowers and backhoes to make sure that he can take care of those items himself. In his free time, Jimmy enjoys taking his children to the farm to hunt, fish, and ride four-wheelers. Jimmy, congratulations on your 5 years of service.
I asked Ralph Brill to come back to recognize Miss Nancy Caruana on her 15 years.
Mayor, Commissioners, it is my pleasure to have Nancy here to recognize her for her 15 years of service. Some people don't know this, but if you got up this morning and you took your shower and you had your cup of coffee, this is the woman you need to thank, because when you turned on the faucet and the water came out, this is the lady here who makes that all happen. And as I found out, there's two things that people, you don't cut. You don't cut their water line, and you don't cut their cable line. Nancy, actually, she started with the town back in '83. And she stayed here for about 4 years, and then she turned to the dark side, and she went to work for Dare County for about 15 years. She finally seen the error of her ways, and she came back. And now she's been with us for 15 years. Some of the things Nancy likes to do is she loves to play in parties. She's our party planner, and that's why I'm going to get her hooked up with Connor for any parties that we also have. The other thing I can tell you is that she's one of the most dedicated people that I've ever worked with. No matter what kind of storm that is coming, you'll find Nancy at the water plant. And I don't just mean hurricanes, I mean northeasters, and probably this weekend, they're predicting a strong northeaster. Nancy will stay there, and I'll tell her all the time, don't worry about it, well, I'll get you there if we need to get there, but no, she's got to stay at the water plant. The other thing is after she's been there for about 32 hours, you know, the other operators come on at 3:30. Nancy usually works from 8 to 4:30. That's her hours. She's usually there till 5:30, 6 o'clock. But she'll call me at 3 o'clock and say, after being there for about 35 hours, is it okay if I leave at 3:30 today? So that's just the kind of person she is. I know she's standing there smiling. She's like, shut up, stupid, and get me off of here. The last thing I will tell you, too, is if you ask the town manager, you know, people ask how we say, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? Well, if you ask the town manager, it's Nancy Carroll retiring. Because he didn't realize how many years she had in the retirement system, and when I told him, he turned about 4 shades of white. I thought he was going to pass out. And he said, she's not going to leave anytime soon. I said, I don't know. That's between you and her. But so that's what keeps Cliff up at night, worrying about if Nancy's going to leave. So without any further comments, I would like to present Nancy for 15 years. Thank you.
Charlotte, come. Sure she does. Charlotte, you know, Nancy had stayed, she would have 35 years. And one of the first people she worked with was our retiring fire chief. Chief Zork started out in the water department. It is an unbelievable, sad but honored and privileged to stand here to present to you our fire chief, who retired December 1st officially. I'm glad, Charlotte, you found the coat and tie to put him on. I have to say how much I appreciate, and I'm glad, Charlotte, that you're here, because you throughout the 34 years that you've had to endure, your husband working in most of those with the fire department, you've had to endure quite a lot. You've had to take care of your 3 daughters when he was taking care of us and the citizens of this town, which he's done an outstanding job of doing so. The town, while we're recognizing your husband for his years of service, we also want to extend a tremendous thank you and give you our appreciation for all that you've had to endure. But he's your problem now. And I do also want to, Friday we had an excellent retirement ceremony for the chief. In that room, it was, you could tell, staff did a great job. Shane and everyone did a great job of putting that on. But when you have a retirement ceremony for someone like Chief Zork, it's really easy to get people to come out to show their love and their appreciation and the respect for Kevin and for all that he did. It was a good occasion for the town, for the chief, but also for the extended fire families, I think. There was a lot of love in that room, a lot of hugging, a lot of stories. I'm glad not all the stories were told, but I am glad that so many were, because it just showed what a great asset we've had for all these many years. Sarah, one of his daughters is here. Hannah and Morgan were able to be here also. His 3 grandchildren were there, and I don't know how anybody spoke after his granddaughter spoke, because the love, to have your granddaughter tell you that you are her hero, to me, that you've done an excellent job. What more is there to do? What more is there to say? But I do want to just say how much we're going to miss you, how much we appreciate all you've done for us, the impact that you've left, the ripple effect that will last for a very long time, that has shown me how important it is to give appreciation and recognize your staff for a job well done. You do an excellent job at developing staff and recognizing staff for the job that they do, and the men and women that are here are a testament to you and what you've done and the legacy that you'll leave. Education, you're proof that you can teach an old dog new tricks, because you are still learning, you are still getting your education, and you've instilled that in all of the men and women of the fire department. As an example, Ocean Rescue is better because of you. Ocean Rescue is the impact of that is better because of you. We saw that. We recognize that today. That is in large part because of your leadership. Safety. I mean, you have been willing to, I guess there's a saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think you would say just because you don't have to doesn't mean you shouldn't. And that speaks to your preparation. And you've taken some hits in your years of expecting and wanting more of people to do more than they should. But it's not just about fighting the fires, it's about preventing the fires. And you've done an excellent job of setting that example and set the bar high and held a high standard for folks to meet. We're going to miss you. The days like this, I don't like to see come. I'm glad for you. I'm glad that you'll be able to. I'm glad that you get to safely retire. Anytime anybody in public safety can retire safely, I'm thrilled because of that, because not everyone gets to. And you've been an unbelievable asset. You will. All those stories that were told about the old timers, we're going to be telling about you on down the road, and I'm just going to smile and be so thankful that I was a part of that, the good old days that you were a part of. So thank you. I present you to the board for your recognition, and I'll call you when I need you.
I'm going to ask the entire board to step up here for a photograph and ask Charlotte to stay and anyone else that Kevin and Charlotte would like to invite up. So I present this plaque to Kevin, which reads, "Upon retirement, with grateful appreciation for your work, dedicated and loyal service," we extend that to Charlotte as well, from the town of Nags Head, 1984 to 2018. Thank you very much.
Mayor, I've often wondered how many towns have had two Chief Kevins and two Chief Kevins retire almost back to back.
Yeah, I hope people don't point at the mayor and say, "Good Lord, he must be hard to deal with." One of the things I learned since, if you were there that day and saw Kevin and Charlotte's granddaughter speak, I've learned since then that that was on the fly. She saw all these people going up and speaking, and she said, can I speak? And so she borrowed a pen, she turned her program over, she wrote her comments, and then when she got a break, she went up to the podium and made her comments, which I thought was just really, really awesome to learn. That was pretty cool. All right, thank you. And next on our agenda is the 2018 Earl Murray Jr. Employee of the Year Award. Me? That's all me? Oh, my goodness. Well, you know, the town of Nags Head is blessed with some really incredible employees. You've seen the example in the last couple of months when we've had people retire and we've had people be recognized for achievement, like our first responders were today. And you get a sense that we have a base of employees that really love working for the town of Nags Head, who really dedicate a lot of effort to what they do here. They really care about what happens in the town of Nags Head. And we appreciate that tremendously. And part of the way that we recognize that every year is by the granting of this Employee of the Year award. Each department puts forth a candidate. We met those at our meeting last month. And then the board has to make an incredibly difficult decision to pull one person out of all of these great employees. But that's what we're charged to do, is make the difficult decisions. And so we've done that. And I would like to ask, and I will again ask the board, if you don't mind participating in this as well, coming forward, that we recognize the 2018 Earl Murray Jr.
We're going to mention who they are,
Oh, I'm sorry.
All the nominees.
all the names.
All the nominees. Well, Cliff's going to have, I don't have that list. Cliff's going to help me with that.
Absolutely. For the police department, it was Ben Jadoff, Police Officer Ben Jadoff. For admin services, it was the Deputy Finance Officer Kim Blankenberg. For Public Works, it was Karen Hagee. Planning and Development, Ed Snyder, our Code Enforcement Officer. And Fire Department, Mr. Tanner Mann. Tanner was unable to be here because then Chief was making him get some education, and so that's where he was then.
And so we appreciate it. And let's have another round of applause for all of those folks who were nominated. They beautifully represented their departments. But the Employee of the Year this year is Kim Blankenberg. Kim, I'm going to ask you to come up and ask all the board members one more time. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Remembering that item E8 has been removed, I would suggest that that become the first item under new business I, if we may. So having the consent agenda modified, a motion to approve the consent agenda would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry.
Does number 7 have anything to do with 8?
Yes.
Cliff, I'm going to ask you to speak to that. Does it? So should we take both of those together?
It would probably,
Make more sense as a discussion? All right, thank you. So, thank you. So I would ask if that motion can be modified to remove both 7 and 8.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and the second stands? All right, so we have a motion to approve the consent agenda with items 7 and 8 removed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Great, thank you very much. Before we move to public hearings, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Return to order. The next item on our agenda is F, public hearings. I know we have a couple of beach equipment vendors now in the audience. The board took comment on beach equipment at the beginning of the meeting during public comment. There's not going to be an additional comment period during that issue. Obviously, you're welcome to stay because for the board's discussion of that. But I just wanted to let you know if you did come in late. Public hearing number 1, to consider changes to Town Code Chapter 34, the Stormwater Ordinance.
All right. So we've been talking about this issue for several months now. At your September retreat is when we last talked about it as a board. We've been discussing the town's permitting process, which includes the timeline for permit turnarounds, as well as the procedures for obtaining a stormwater approval for residential development. The board has asked staff to look at our procedures and our ordinance to see how we might accommodate better designs for stormwater management, as well as improve the application process and turnaround times and coordination with staff on the process itself. So we had been meeting with the Outer Banks Home Builders Association, myself, the town manager, Mayor Cahoon and Commissioner Sears, as well as the Home Builders President and several other members, to talk about ways we could streamline the ordinance without sacrificing the effectiveness of the ordinance, and hopefully gaining some additional improvements in the methods people were using to accommodate stormwater on their property. We had a series of meetings prior to the planning board and then even after the planning board. We've revamped the residential section of the ordinance. You will see basically a new section in the introduction which describes the new procedures. The primary thing that I think we tried to do with this ordinance is we've basically separated out residential from commercial. The previous ordinance sort of overlapped some of the application procedures and then the procedures you had to follow at the end of a project to get your CO. And we've really decoupled these so we can treat each one completely separate when it comes to stormwater management and fill. We have decoupled the stormwater management requirements from the fill requirements. If you recall from the previous or the current ordinance, the stormwater management is tied to filling. And so if you fill a property, you're required to do stormwater management. If you filled more than 2 feet, you were required to do an engineered stormwater plan. With this revision, every project is going to have to do stormwater management, regardless of fill. It's no longer tied to fill, which would pull in a lot of the oceanfront properties that were previously not doing it, because typically you're not filling on an oceanfront property due to the V-zone requirements. It creates one standard for the stormwater management. As I just mentioned, we had a standard of 1.5 inch design storm for your stormwater management for your normal applications, and then filling 2 feet or more required you to meet a 2.15 inch engineered design standard for stormwater. This new ordinance creates one standard for all the projects. And that standard is a more prescriptive standard. It's no longer an 1.5 inch design storm. It's basically a volume requirement. And the volume requirement we have in the ordinance is you have to provide 15 cubic feet of storage for every 100 square feet of built-upon area. We had been researching ordinances and developing this process. The town of Emerald Isle had used a similar process to this. We spoke with their staff, and they've been using this for years, and they had seen a lot of success with this. A lot of the builders in that area had become very used to it, knew what the requirements were. They did a simple site visit to the property with the contractor prior to the application, worked out the stormwater procedures, and then they were able to apply, and it was a very, very seamless process. And so that's really how we've modeled this process, is that you would meet with a staff person. Typically, that would be Kate Jones. You would bring a survey with survey information that we've asked for, and I'll show you that in a little bit. And then at that point, you could meet with the staff person on site and basically figure out the stormwater plan with input from staff. Staff would basically be providing guidance to the contractor to help educate the contractor on what the requirements are and how to meet the requirements and the different methods they could use to meet the requirements. This ordinance focuses on low-impact development, and it lists a variety of techniques you can use in combination to meet the requirement. Those could be anywhere from infiltration basins to vegetated swales. I'll just say we're no longer looking at allowing grassed swales. If you're going to do a swale, it needs to be vegetated with landscape material. What we were seeing in the previous applications is the swales weren't properly stabilized, and they essentially became more bare swales. Rain barrels, rain gardens, dry wells and infiltration trenches and French drains. These were the methods that were being used primarily in Emerald Isle. Contractors were basically digging trenches, and you would backfill, you would line the trench with a filter fabric and backfill it with rock, and then you would install a sock pipe in the trench, and then the trench may be a 2 foot by 3 foot trench, so 1 linear foot of the trench is essentially 6 cubic feet of volume, multiplied by 0.4. But that was a common method because that could be put below the ground, and so you could actually sod over top of that if you wanted to. In some cases, you could put an improvement over top, like a gravel walkway or pathway along the side of the house, so it could be something that could be more functional. One of the criticisms we had received from the stormwater ordinance is that the swales along the sides of the property really rendered that part of the property unusable, and they were hard to maintain, hard to mow, and this type of thing becomes more of a functional improvement. Beyond the initial application process, after the stormwater application has been approved, at the end of a project, you would no longer need to show your stormwater management measures on your as-built survey. That had been a fairly common point of contention with the home builders, and going back multiple times to have a surveyor show these different measures and actually compute the elevation of the swales. And so we're no longer looking at doing any of that. These are all going to be field verified and looking at more simplified cross-sections for these swales so they can be visually verified as opposed to having to be surveyed in. And then the operation and maintenance agreements were something that we were asking people to sign, and we're no longer going to do that. We're going to have them just sign an acknowledgement on the application itself. And so essentially, at the end of a project, you've got your construction record is really your original site plan. And so as long as they construct it according to the site plan, and then any modifications later are amended on the site plan, then that becomes what staff can look at to see in the future if any modifications are made. So we can still track what happened, and then we could just enforce the ordinance like we would with any other ordinance through a notice of violation civil penalty process. So no longer needing that operation and maintenance agreement.
Andy, if I can stop you there
Sure.
for a second, because I've gotten a little bit out of order. That introduction, I think, can stand, but we should be in public hearing.
Well, I think it's a legislative matter, and so I think it's fine for Andy to continue, and then when we're ready to actually open up for public comment, then we can switch to that.
Okay,
So I
great.
think we're fine.
All right, okay. I didn't want to go any further without making
No
sure,
problem.
checking on that. Okay, Andy, continue, please.
Okay. Roberta, if you wouldn't mind, just have a few slides to show you a few things here. So these are just some of the methods that we just described. This would be a dry well. So you've got a gutter on the home that's connected to an actual dry well. It's a below grade, essentially a trench that has could have a divisor, could just be backfilled with gravel. A French drain, this is what I was talking about before, where you have a below grade trench that's backfilled with gravel, and you typically have a sock pipe in the trench, and then you can even cover it with sod or leave it open. On the right hand picture there, they actually have a French drain underneath that gravel walkway, and so commonly people put walkways to get from the front to the back of the house, and this could be incorporated underneath of that, and you could actually gutter your roof to the French drain and connect it directly to that sock pipe, or you could let it gravity flow to the French drain and not have to gutter it. So we see this as being something that people might opt to use fairly commonly. That's an example of a vegetated swale. This one has a fairly dense amount of vegetation in it, but certainly you could plant trees, shrubs, or a variety of different plants in the vegetated swale. And then there could be different cross-sections for that. This is an example of a rain garden. I think everybody knows what a rain garden is. This is really hard to see, but this is a site plan which shows what a stormwater management plan might look like. And typically, this would just be marked up on the original survey that they provide. The survey would have the footprint of all their structures, the pool, the driveway, the house. They would have a breakdown of what's a permeable surface and what's impervious surface. For the purposes of a built-upon area, it's a little bit different than lot coverage. We don't count pool water area or wood-slatted decking as built-upon area. So then you would go through and calculate what is built-upon area, and then from there, that's something that the surveyor would do. And then from there, you could determine what your volume requirement is, and it's a simple calculation. You're just multiplying your total dividing your total built-upon area by 100, and then multiplying it by 15. And there are some incentives in this ordinance, which we're hoping that people rely on almost in every case. We've provided a significant tree preservation credit. So for every tree that's greater than 6 inches in caliper that they preserve on the site, they get a 100 square foot reduction in built-upon area, and they can use that credit up to 30% of their total volume requirement. And we're trying to encourage people to use multiple measures in their stormwater management design. What we were seeing previously was that people were just putting in swales, and that was all they were doing. So we're trying to encourage people to use 3 or more measures, so we're providing an additional reduction in built-upon area credit for using 3 or more measures. And in this case, they've done that. You've got a permeable driveway. Here, you've got, on this side of the house, they've done a landscaped vegetated swale. Here, on this side of the house, they've done a small infiltration trench or French drain. They've got a permeable surface around the pool water, and then they've got some preserved vegetation, trees in the back. And so that provided them a reduction in their built-upon area, and then from there, they were able to meet the other requirements with these different improvements. And the way the standard works is relative to the 1.5-inch design storm that we had previously, or we have currently, the requirement, the 15 cubic feet, initially is actually slightly above the 1.5-inch design storm. And one of the things we were looking at is previously we had the 1.5 inch for the normal projects and the 2.15 for the projects with fill over 2 feet. And so this really kind of comes in the middle of that. But if you take advantage of these credits, which we're hoping people will do, then you actually end up closer to the 1.5 inch or even below that in most cases. So it's a strong incentive for people to use those incentives. And another incentive we've provided is if you use permeable pavement, such as turf stone or another measure, then we don't even, you don't have to provide any further stormwater measures for the permeable pavement. It counts 100% credit towards the volume requirement for that. This is an example of minimum survey requirements document. We had extensive discussions with the home builders about this. Initially, we had talked about requiring 1-foot contours. We received some heartburn feedback about that requirement, that it's not necessary in all cases, that most lots you could accomplish what you want without the 1-foot contours. So we've prepared this document, and we have been using something similar to this for a while, which shows the survey requirements, and it has spot elevations that we're going to ask for up front. And what our plan would be to go ahead today and send this document to all the surveyors and communicate with them directly that if you're doing a survey in Nags Head, a contractor comes to you and asks you to prepare a survey, this is what you need to tell them that we're going to require. And then from there, there's no guesswork. And that's one of the comments we receive probably more than anything, is that people just want to know what the requirements are. They don't have a problem with the requirements. It's just not knowing what they are leads to additional costs that they didn't plan for when they're bidding these projects. So as long as all the surveyors know what the requirements are, then we should benefit from that. And that's what we would plan to do to roll this ordinance out. And once they come to our initial site visit with a staff person prior to the application, then we can take this survey and draw up the stormwater plan by hand on the site plan. So that's a summary of the ordinance that we've been working on. Kate and David have both been helping put together all this information. I appreciate their help, and we look forward to any comments from the board.
Okay, thank you. I believe now would be the appropriate time for us to enter into public hearing now.
Okay, at this time, we'll open the public hearing on this proposed ordinance change. Andy, are there any presentations from the planning board?
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, Planning Board Chairman Mark Cornwell is here, and I'm not sure if he plans on giving a presentation. I didn't think he was, but they did review this at their November 20th meeting and voted unanimously to adopt or recommend adoption of the ordinance.
Board members, any questions for Andy?
One, in section 34-6-9, and it used to be 4, it's been struck, and it talks, let me find it, we have a lot to go through. 34-9, where at the end it talks about easements required for shared swales and so forth. Are those easements being required currently before a CO is issued?
For a shared swale? Yeah, if it was part of their design.
But if they don't submit something in writing, we don't issue a CO, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, Webb?
I guess 3 questions. I'm having a hard time finding it, but the ordinance refers to single-family development and duplexes. Are townhomes included?
No.
Where do townhomes fall?
That would be the commercial standard.
Okay, same with triplexes? So this only applies directly to single-family and duplex. Everything else is going to have a commercial standard applied to it?
Yes.
Okay. That's the first question. Second question, I think this one's probably pretty easy. We would talk about rainwater harvesting devices. Can they be directly under the house?
Good question. You know, the ordinance does say that we're not allowing someone to direct stormwater under a home.
That was my next.
But if it was, what it says is that open storage of water under a home is not allowed, but that wouldn't be open storage.
That's correct.
And so I think we would probably allow something like that if it was a closed container.
Okay, so a closed container would be allowed, but I guess it was called the, like, open water drainage or something, we wouldn't.
Right.
Can you explain to me why we wouldn't?
Well, we've had a discussion about this on numerous occasions. As a stormwater best practice, directing water below a house, that would ultimately not be a good practice from a construction standpoint. When you've got standing water under a building that may be sitting near the foundation or the pilings, is not something that we would recommend, just as an engineering practice and a construction practice.
I mean, I understand that in general, but if the water table is like 15 feet below your house, you could direct it under the house and it's just going to drain straight through. But that's not a biggie. But I guess the next one, if you use, like, let's say you won't reduce lot coverage. The question is, what happens if the tree dies?
Good question. You know, a lot of times we're not going to know about that. They'll have received a credit or a reduction in built-upon area for that tree, and if it dies, we won't know about it.
Correct.
So the chances are that it would be at a later date that we may learn about it through a project. If they did another project on that property, is when we might learn about it. Or, of course, if there was a complaint directly related to a stormwater issue, we might learn about it at that point. We would have to go back and look at the original site plan to determine what was required originally. Those trees would be noted on the site plan. You know, there would be notations for every tree they're going to save and, you know, would indicate the species and the size.
I personally, this is for the board, not for staff, but I think that's kind of a slippery slope about the trees being counted. But that's just me. Other than that, I think the staff and Commissioner Sears and everybody in work with the home builder has done a wonderful job, and I really appreciate everything that's been done. I just, you know, have a couple of questions.
Okay, thank you.
I
Commissioner?
think, Webb, I think on that, with the trees that were not being removed from the lot, so we don't strip a lot to build upon, and it was more about saving the vegetation that was currently there in hopes that it would remain there down the road.
Commissioner Walters?
Just to follow up on something Commissioner Fuller said, so let's say there's a large tree on a lot and they get credit for that, and the tree dies. I mean, it's going to happen. Trees get diseases and those kind of things. If the property owner came back and then wanted to expand a home into the space where the tree was, that would not be allowed. Is that correct or incorrect?
Well, if they expanded the footprint of a home that had a previously approved stormwater plan, they would have to account for that new built-upon area, you know, in some sort of stormwater measure. And then the tree that died, you know, the easy remedy for that is to plant 2 new trees. And that would equal the credit they receive for 1 existing mature tree. So and they could do that, you know, anywhere they had space to do that.
So there is a mechanism to
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's, everything's a bit of a balancing act. And this credit, as, open to changes down the road as it is, seems like a good balance to, as Commissioner Sears indicated, try to keep clear cutting from happening on lots as we've been seeing. And I can't count the number of times Commissioner Cahoon has mentioned the value of trees in reducing, taking up stormwater. It's a trade that's hopefully a good one where, despite the occasional incidents where we'll lose one, that we'll have enough participation, enough trees saved that we will enhance the stormwater. From the retreat, the mandate from the board, the direction the board gave to staff, if I recall correctly, was to simplify the ordinance for stormwater and to not do that in such a way that it increased the stormwater runoff, and so that we maintain that control. And I agree, I think staff has accomplished that. That was also part of a discussion that was about simplifying the rules so that it didn't take as much time for review in permitting and in issuing certificates of occupancy, and I believe this system will accomplish that. It remains to be seen, but it certainly seems like it should do that as well.
And I'd like to add that also was going to reduce the cost to the homeowner that's building the property, and it also will allow existing property owners options for stormwater relief in their current situation at a low cost to them.
Any other questions for Andy this time, members? Okay. All right, then at this time, thank you, Andy. This time, we'll go ahead and ask if there are any members of the public who'd like to address this proposed ordinance. If you'll please make your presentation at this time, if you'll come forward and state your name and address. Okay, seeing none. Board members, any final questions for Andy or anybody else on this ordinance?
Anyone?
Okay.
I see none.
Then we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. At this time, the members may deliberate. Just as a reminder, it will take at least four votes to approve the ordinance today at its first reading.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Sears, anything further?
No, sir.
Commissioner Cahoon? Okay. Commissioner Walters? 4? No. All right, seeing no additional comment, then I believe a motion would be in order.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt as presented.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. One more time, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing to consider changes to Town Code Section 48-371. Mr. Hobbs, I am going to turn to you this time.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. This time, we will open the public hearing on the proposed ordinance on commercial design standards. And this time, I'll recognize Andy Garman for a presentation.
Thank you. So as you are aware, that we have been working for some time now on this focus project. We've completed our comprehensive plan in, I believe, July of 2017. Since that time, the technical committee, which is working on the ordinance side of the project, has been working on the UDO since that time. We are getting closer to completion of that process, and part of the process has involved drafting a set of commercial design standards. In order to not lose ground as we continue to receive projects for consideration by the board, we have pulled forward some of the commercial design standards for review now prior to bringing the entire UDO forward, and that's what you have in front of you today. Just a little explanation about the commercial design standards. So this section we're looking at is currently 48-371 of the ordinance. This was adopted, I believe, in 2004, 2005, and there's been some amendments to the standards over time. The most recent, well, we've had several projects that utilize the design standards. Probably the most recent one was the Cottage Court and Event Site near the Historic District. We also reviewed the Sherwin-Williams site. And then the Lidl project was one we reviewed under the commercial design standards last year. So the Sherwin-Williams site and the other two, and the Cottage Court were reviewed using the residential design standards, which is an option under the commercial design standards we have currently in place. It's really designed for smaller buildings, and what we're trying to encourage with that is a flexible process that allows somebody to design a building that more resembles a residential scale development. And the primary thing we're looking for with that is a building that has a full pitched roof. So when you get into these larger scale buildings like we had with the Lidl, you really no longer have the ability to have a full pitched roof over the building because of the square footage and the overall size of the footprint of the building. You really can't have a pitched roof and meet the height requirements that we have. And so what you see is a box, and then usually there's a mansard or some sort of roof attached to the box. And that is considered under our alternative standards, which is a very prescriptive set of requirements that we look at. And so the residential standards that we have, I think, have generally been good. I think everybody's been pleased with the design that we've received using those standards. I think there's been a little bit of criticism. At the technical committee level, they wanted to see some changes to the process when looking at the larger buildings. And so that's essentially what we've done with this set of standards for looking at buildings, is modified the process for how we look at these larger projects. So just moving on. So just getting into the process. So if your project has a total square footage of 5,000 square feet or less, then you would follow the process we use now. You would simply go to technical review committee, and then the project would go forward to the planning board and board of commissioners. And it's really designed to be a really simple process for those size projects. When you get beyond 5,000 square feet, what we've recommended is having a sketch plan review for the design, which would be really more of a conceptual level review with the planning board. Done early in the process, we're asking folks to come to the planning board, have several alternatives that we could look at, provide comments early on so that they haven't gone so far with the design that they're not really willing to change anything. After they complete that process, they could make revisions, decide on a final alternative, and then go through the technical review committee and the planning board from there. So it's really just looking at having a little bit more input on the larger projects, which tend to have a greater impact in the town. That process is laid out in the ordinance. The size requirements for looking at the different design options. So 5,000 square feet is the trigger for sketch plan review. However, 10,000 square feet is the trigger for when you can no longer just use the residential design guidelines for the building design. You have to actually use the design guidelines we've laid out in the ordinance. And when I say design guidelines, I'm referring to the design manual that we've been using for residential projects as opposed to what's in this ordinance. And so when you get above 10,000 square feet, you're really looking at the requirements that have been laid out in this ordinance for the building design. So we're looking at all these different standards, and the standards are mandatory, but there are some guidelines that go along with the standards to help clarify the intent of the review. The technical, it's interesting because at a previous meeting, the board members talked about may versus shall and how the ordinance reads, and the technical committee actually had this discussion. And originally, we had more mays than shalls, and the technical committee asked us to look at having more clear standards, and so we went through a round of revisions to do that, and that's what we've come up with today in the ordinance that you see. So getting into the design criteria for these larger buildings, one of the primary things we have is the requirements that look at scale, And I think that's one of the things that we haven't really had with our current ordinances is, you know, how are we really addressing scale in terms of what we want to see in the town? And one of the several standards listed here on the screen, standards for the height of the building, we're looking at a sort of a top plate requirement for each floor. And so this was discussed by the committee. You have a lot of buildings in town, larger box buildings that, you know, it's a one-story building, but the plate height is 30 or 35 feet. And so what we're looking at doing is trying to scale down those buildings. So if you have a one-story building, your plate height's more like 12 feet, which is more of a residential scale as opposed to these really massive building walls for one-story buildings. And then from there, it's much easier to obtain that more or less residential scale of development, human scale development. There's a limitation of 3 stories for most buildings. There are some exceptions to that, such as the case in hotels in the hotel overlay district. There's a number of provisions talking about roof articulations to break up the mass of the building. Some of those standards are similar to what we have now in terms of providing dormers or built bump outs or variations in the footprint of the building to break up the scale of the building. And then providing facade elements at the first floor, such as a porch or transition of different building materials between the first and second floor to help break up the scale of the building. Size of the building. So back to the comprehensive plan, a lot of what the comprehensive plan talked about was appropriate size of buildings based on these character areas that we had defined. And one of the primary character areas was the roadway corridors throughout town. So there's certainly a much more distinct feel between the bypass and the beach road. And so we wanted to try to recognize that in the ordinance. It's been already acknowledged in the comprehensive plan. And so the committee has come up with different size limitations for buildings, depending on if you're on a 2-lane roadway corridor or a 5-lane roadway corridor. And generally, for the 2-lane roadway corridor, it's a 10,000 square foot maximum. The 5-lane roadway section would generally be 20,000 square feet. Height. The height, there's not much difference in the height. It's generally still 35 feet, and you can go to a 42-foot height with an 812 roof pitch. And so there's not much variation there. We are asking for people to pay closer attention to the features that would break down the height and mass of the building, sort of looking at varied building forms, having multiple buildings, or incorporating that 3rd story into the roof line with dormers as opposed to having a full wall that extends up to the 30 or 35 foot height limit. And then a lot of the architectural design elements that are in the guidelines really are similar to what we'd already included in our current system. I'm looking at walls and roofs and windows and doors, how those really reflect more of a residential design. The type of siding materials that you can use, the detailing, some of that's very similar to the residential design guidelines, and a few other things listed there. We also look at where you place utilities and mechanical equipment and trash and recycling enclosures. So this is, as I mentioned, this is just a section of the commercial design standards dealing with building design. The commercial design standards also talks about site layout in terms of building and parking lot placement on the site, orientation. It talks about the actual parking lot design and driveway access to streets. It includes landscaping and buffering, as well as lighting and stormwater. A lot of that has been pulled out of some of the various sections of the code and incorporated into the commercial design standards to be more of a unified set of standards for commercial design, instead of going and looking at multiple different code sections to figure out the requirements for a commercial site. So those sections will be brought forward with the UDO, which you will receive before Christmas. And essentially, that's our presentation for today. The planning board looked at this on November 20th, and they also voted unanimously to recommend adoption of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Andy, I had a couple questions, or a question. I think Ben had provided a couple comments, or we had, about the addition of a consistency statement to the ordinance.
Yes. And I believe we did that.
So there's a revised version that's been distributed? Okay, and that would be, I guess that was added somewhere in the whereas, one of the whereas
Yeah, I believe it's the
paragraphs.
last whereas statement. It should be the
Okay.
last whereas statement.
All right. And and then the other comment dealing with the references to documents, like design-type documents.
In terms of the residential design guidelines. So the design guidelines are actually in the current town code. They're part of the town code. They're Appendix A.
Okay.
And so they don't exist outside of the code. So we're still referencing Appendix A
Okay.
in this, so that we have met that request.
Okay, sorry, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Any questions for Andy from the board?
I don't have a question. I'd like to make an observation. Having been on the Comprehensive Plan Committee and then on the Technical Committee, in my mind, that this part of the ordinance does a couple of important things. One, the design standards that are regulated by this are what most of us see and respond to in the community. And so this section of the ordinance has, in my mind, a bigger impact than our table of uses and some other things, because regardless of what the use is in the building, what the building looks like and what the site looks like are what we see and respond to. In going through all these discussions, one of the things, you know, that I've been practicing in Nags Head for 30 years, and we've done just about every kind of building type and dozens of buildings in the town under essentially the current regulations. And one of the things I've argued against throughout this process is that we continue to be allowed essentially to decorate boxes, take 10 and 12,000 square foot boxes, and apply certain elements and have that pass the ordinance. That somehow the ordinance needed to be written in a way that it also modified the shape of the building and the form of the building, so that we would get away from that. And I believe that this accomplishes that. The other thing that, in my mind, is the most critical part of this is that we have a commercial zone that extends from the beach road to the bypass and allows the same set of uses. And we've only been lucky not to have a 10 or 12,000 square foot, one of those boxes that are mostly on 158. We've only been lucky not to have one of those on the beach road. It's not because our regulations prohibited it, it's just because it didn't happen. And so this ordinance attempts to get a handle on that and to break down any buildings, not to prohibit anybody from building that many square feet, but to change the way that they do it so that it's in the form of smaller structures. And those are, in terms of what our town looks like, in my mind, those are really critical, the most critical components, if I could sort of summarize where I think this is. Having spent a couple of years now on this, more than 2 years on this effort, along with the committee, I would hate to see something happen that sort of got under the wire and made us sorry that we didn't go ahead and move forward a set of regulations that we had, that were ready, that we had sitting on the shelf waiting for the rest of it to be done. I understand the concerns about modifying the ordinance without other pieces in hand that may conflict, but again, as I said, I think it would be a shame not to bring this forward when we have it ready and the committee's done the work that they've done on it. And so with that, I'll ask commissioners, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say if any commissioners had any further
Yes,
questions.
so this would be questions for Andy. Commissioner Sears?
No questions.
Commissioner Cahoon? Commissioner Walters? Fuller? Okay, thank you.
And any need for a presentation from any of the planning board? Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, at this time, we will ask any members of the public who would like to make a presentation on this proposed ordinance at this time, if you'll come forward, make your presentation and state your name and address, please. Seeing none, then unless there are any remaining questions from the board, then we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and the board may now deliberate on the proposed ordinance. And again, as a reminder, it will require at least 4 votes to adopt this ordinance on the first reading.
All right, thank you. So I will start at my left. Commissioner Sears?
No questions. No
Okay,
discussion.
Commissioner Cahoon? Commissioner Walters? Commissioner Fuller? No. Okay. In that case, if there are no further questions or discussion, then I think a motion would be in order.
Motion to adopt is presented.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt as presented. One more time, opportunity for questions or comment? All right. Hearing none, then all of those in favor, we have a motion and a second to adopt as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. And thank you to the committee. We'll get another chance to thank them, but thank you to the committee, to the planning board, to the staff, everybody who's worked so hard on this. And I think that this is a really great first step in adopting the new UDO. So thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda would be reports and recommendations from the Planning Board and the Planning and Development Director. Focus Technical Committee, UDO. Who will speak to that? Holly?
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Happy to provide you with an update on the Focus Technical Committee. Staff is continuing to work through with the consultant to develop our final draft. We have a meeting scheduled for December 6th, which is tomorrow, with the Technical Committee to review the Appendix A definitions and go through some of those. And we're getting to the end, so we're concluding everything. And today was a first step, like you acknowledged, towards adoption. So we look forward to having a complete and final draft for you in hand by hopefully the 18th of December.
Okay, great. Thank you. We
Yes,
look
thank
forward
you.
very much to seeing it.
Yes.
It's been noted that that's going to be a big document, and it's going to need a fair amount of time for us to process. So that's certainly going to be a topic of discussion at our retreat, and that should give everybody time to have dug into it and been able to pull questions together and look for conflicts and concerns. Thank you. David?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Board of Commissioners. Just wanted to go ahead and give the board an update on the 3 capital improvement drainage projects. We've been working diligently on those 3 projects. They were advertised for bid last week. We're going to have a pre-bid meeting scheduled for next Monday and receive bids December 20th. Also, the board can go ahead and consider that at their January 2nd meeting, and then the financing arm of that, which is scheduled to occur in February. So we are currently on schedule as in accordance with the schedule that we had previously provided the board. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is out to bid?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any sense of the level of interest in it and how many contractors may have requested documents at this point?
At this point, we had done some advance notification with local contractors. We had been in contact with half a dozen local contractors, given them advance notification was coming. Each one of those contractors received the bid documents last week, and then we've had subsequent follow-ups from material suppliers and subcontractors. So at this point, I think we've got 7 in total.
Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate you being proactive and pushing that out. Commissioner Walters?
Just like for the record and for the audience, can you state what those projects are?
Yes, the 3 project areas are Gallery Row and the replacement of the dual 24-inch pipes that go under the roadway. The second project is Nags Head Acres with the implementation of the groundwater lowering system. And then the third project area is within the village of Nags Head along South Virginia Dare Trail, spanning between Mall Drive and Epstein Street with a groundwater lowering system and implementation.
Okay, all right, thank you. Commissioner Sears? Any questions? Commissioner Cahoon? All right, great. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
So this is the, nope, I'm sorry. It's not quite. So we need Commissioner Fuller for this next part of the discussion since he was on this committee with Commissioner Sears. So we'll wait just a few seconds. So the next item on our agenda is item H, old business. Number 1 is the proposed ordinance or regarding tents on the beach. Mr. Town Manager?
Yes, sir. At your November 7th meeting, you first heard this ordinance. There was a lot of public comment that was made at that meeting concerning some concern about being able to meet the conditions of a permit for those that are in the business of setting up tents on the beach for use, particularly that the times of the day where tents would be allowed to be placed on the beach. The mayor appointed Commissioner Sears and Commissioner Fuller to go meet with some of these vendors. That meeting was taking place soon after that, the board meeting. Andy Garman has put together the notes which are in your packet from that meeting, as well as a revision to the ordinance, and it's back now for your discussion and approval, and Andy can address the changes.
So, I mean, the board has seen the meeting notes from the meeting, and obviously, the biggest concern from the vendors was the hours that we had set in the ordinance. Originally was listed as 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Outside those hours, you couldn't have equipment on the beach. That was really going to hamper their ability to get the tents set up for their customers. If they couldn't have them out there till 10, or they couldn't actually start the first one until 10, it could be noon until they get the last one out, and that would be problematic from the business standpoint. So I think that was the biggest thing that the committee wanted to see changed. The draft ordinance has been changed to have a 7 a.m. start time. It still has a 6 p.m. end time. That is a little different than Chapter 8 of our town code, which says that for the general public, the time is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And one of the things that we're discussing now is the possibility of bringing back an ordinance change to that section to pull that back to 6 p.m. This was discussed with the committee during the meeting that Duck is actually allowing the tents until 5 p.m., and that allows them to have more time in the evening to collect the tents prior to dark. Right now, the way our ordinance is written, with the 8 p.m. End time, our staff really can't get out in the evening to collect the tents. And so that's something that we are considering, and so we have left it at 6 p.m. in this ordinance in case we want to bring that back and be able to do that. And beyond that, there's no other changes to the ordinance that we've made since you last saw it.
All right, thank you. I would ask to hear, I'll start with Commissioner Sears, any input since you were on that committee, if you have any comments.
Yeah, I think it was a good meeting overall. We had good turnout from the vendors, and the vendors were very willing to work with us, as I hope they feel we were willing to work with them. Some of the reason for moving it from 8 to 6 is to allow the town the time to collect tents nightly off of the beach for safety reasons. That we have a lot of folks and kids that run around the beach at night, and we want to have a clean place that they can enjoy. In that discussion with the vendors, we've come to find out that they do remove 100% of their tents every night And most of the tents that are left by vacationers who have an inferior product that you can't move once you set it up because of salt air, et cetera. For that reason, we have considered, as you see in your package, some other things so that everybody's on the same playing field, both the vendors and the vacationers, about the tents and the areas that they can put the tents up. So more education, and I think we're picking them up each night. We'll probably have less tents visible, and with the willingness of the vendors to self-police and to help us build this ordinance, I think we'll be able to enjoy it.
Thank you, and I'll move to the other end to Commissioner Fuller, since he was also on that committee.
And can we talk a little bit broader than just what's in front of us?
Well, let me ask if there are questions by the other commissioners about
If I
this
was given that
piece.
time later, I'll be fine just to speak
Yes,
quickly.
yes.
I agree 100% with Commissioner Sears and support what he says. I thought I brought up at the last time, but I'm not sure, but is there a definition of beach equipment anywhere in the current ordinance or proposed ordinance? And if it's not, then I think we need a definition for beach equipment. We talk about beach equipment, but is there a definition? That's the beach equipment concierge service. I'm asking if there's a definition of beach equipment.
There is not a definition of beach equipment.
And I highly recommend that there be a definition of beach equipment, because we talk about beach equipment all through the ordinance, but we don't tell anybody what that is.
Okay. Thank you. So if we can ask staff to develop that definition.
And then the next just specific thing is, in the proposed ordinance, we do talk about no tent zones at beach accesses. But we have not talked about adding no beach zone, no tent zones at lifeguard stands. And is that deliberate? That, because in the discussions that we had, we talked about no tent zones at lifeguard stands and beach accesses, but the proposal in front of us is no tent zones, only at beach accesses.
I'm sorry, I was just asking Deputy Chief Hyde if we have lifeguard stands that are not at accesses, or if they're offset from the accesses so that they would need to be regulated separately. That, I'm not that familiar with exactly where the placement of the stands are, if by what we've included here would capture that, or if we would need to do that separately as well. Can you?
Some of them are offset, for sure.
All right, they're either directly in front of a beach access or offset, but generally at a beach access of some sort, yes, sir.
So right now, as what's being presented, we could have a tent right beside a lifeguard stand. What, just because of the nature of the beach.
Right, if it were offset far enough from the beach
And
access.
And they are, because we're
Okay.
talking 50 feet.
Okay. Okay.
I just want to make that point.
Okay.
And hopefully, we can come back later if we need to.
Right, well, and I would think that our lifeguards would still have the discretion to protect public safety by saying if a tent is in the way, they can do that.
That is in here.
Okay,
I mean, it gives the public safety the discretion to tell somebody to move their tent.
Okay.
It does do that.
okay, thank you.
And then later, I would like to make further comment if I may.
Okay, sure. Commissioner Walters.
I have no comment at this time.
Okay, all right. Commissioner Cahoon?
I really thought the dialogue that I've read back and forth was extremely positive and productive. I thank the business companies for coming forward, sharing their thoughts, participating, and to commissioners for facilitating that. I think some education for us came out of that, that the vendors are removing their equipment every day, not leaving it. And I like the idea that they're not going to set stuff out if the people don't request it that day. Even if they've paid for it for a week, if they're not going to use it, there's no need to set it up. So I do think some positive comments came out of it.
Thank you. I also want to thank Commissioner Sears and Commissioner Fuller for that conversation and for the vendors who participated. The charge was to look for unintended consequences, and I think the unintended consequence that was found was essentially those hours were going to effectively eliminate the service and not dampen the service in the way that we envisioned. So I think it was appropriate to have that discussion and consider that change of time. This kind of regulation is a tightrope that towns like Nags Head have to walk. I mean, we have to strike a balance between what preserves the beach as a natural feature and for our commerce, frankly, of the people who choose to visit here, that they have reasonable access to the services that they desire. We're trying to strike a balance all the time between the people who live here year-round and the people who visit here. And so this regulation is an attempt to do all of that, and I think is a reasonable attempt for us to try to do that. Any further questions or comment on the ordinance? I understand that we want to have some additional discussion. I would suggest that we dispose of the ordinance and then expand the discussion to the related issues. Can we do that, or Commissioner Walters?
I have a question under, regarding the ordinance, and it's page 4, beach equipment concierge service regulations. Individual beach canopy umbrella sign shall not exceed 144 square inches in area, and I appreciate everyone that's worked together on this. I think it was really great. I think it was a learning experience probably for everybody on the committee and ultimately for the board. But the 144 square inches in area, I just want to make sure that there's, an ordinance has to be enforceable. Is there an expectation that somebody's going to go out there and measure that signage on those tents?
I would expect it, and I think every vendor that we talk to are far less than 144. Except, I mean, when I say that, there are some that have much larger that participated, but by and large, most of the vendors want just an identifying marker to show that it's there. They own it. And most of them already comply with the 144. It's the ones that were doing what I consider off-site advertising were the ones that don't want, or were not, that don't want the 144. They want a sign all the way around their tent.
Okay, so the concern when we started was commercialization of the beach. Correct. Is that, okay. And my biggest concern is the public safety aspect. So I just want to make sure that we don't go down this path and there's an expectation that lifeguards are going to be policing signs on tents, that they are still first and foremost in charge of public safety. So that's all.
Yes. Thank you. And a note to the vendors in terms of the self-policing is, don't make us wish we had measured signage on tents. Any further comment on the ordinance?
I just emailed a new ordinance with a definition, and it was attempting to address the lifeguard stand issue as well. And so, Roberta, I know it may take a minute, but would you mind pulling that?
Did you add a definition of beach equipment?
Yes. My best attempt.
And you emailed it?
Mm-hmm. And she's bringing it up now. I mean, it basically,
That enlarged a little bit.
Break out the glasses.
it basically reiterated the items listed under the definition for beach equipment concierge service. Basically said beach equipment shall include but not limited to, and then it lists out the items that were in the concierge service definition.
Yes, Commissioner Walters.
Just follow up a little bit, okay? We've gotten really specific about some things, which is largely has to do with commercialization of the beach, and it's tents, it's umbrellas, it's, you know, chairs, those kind of things. So what if they start renting beach towels, extra large beach towels with their whole logo on it? Is that equipment? Is that commercialization of the beach? Would that be prohibited?
Not according to this.
Okay. Okay.
You know, the practical side of this is that when the vendors get a permit, they know the conditions of the ordinance. And so if they're going to go and set up for the day equipment for someone, they're going to, whatever it is that they're providing would be 50 feet from the access point or the lifeguard stand. And so that's, whether they have a cooler or a beach chair or a tent or, you know, anything else, this ordinance really just pertains to them. And so those are the parameters by which they would operate.
Okay. And it says 50 feet?
Yes,
Okay.
and so I've changed that as well. And so we could look at that. If you're satisfied with the definition, we could look at that next.
May I ask Roberta to do me a favor, to ask another question? Roberta, can you bring up our website, please? So this is the picture on the front of our website. Because we assist people, we have wheelchairs at the fire department, we help people get to the beach when they need assistance. Clearly, this woman is sitting under a tent, and she received our assistance. We have mats to help with this. Are we going to tell her and her family that she has to get 50 feet from the access? I'm just saying,
That's
who
what the-
are we and what are we
That's
doing?
what the ordinance says, but who says she's not 50 feet from the access?
I mean, I'm not saying that she's not 50 feet from the access. I just know that there's limited mobility to the point where we, as a service we provide our citizens and guests, helped her get to a beach and under a tent so she could enjoy the day at the beach. Are we going to tell her and her family that you have to move 50 feet from this access?
We don't know she's at an access, and my answer would be, if we can move her down to the beach, we can move her down on the beach, which we're doing anyway. It's a matter of going 50 feet further.
Commissioner Cahoon.
My guess, and this is a guess, is that wherever the lady went from the beach was probably in front of a rental property to which she was staying. And if that's within the parameters of that property, it doesn't matter whether she's 50 feet because that's within the property that they're renting. You can be on a property line and not be within the beach access. I think the goal is to not have the beach accesses blocked.
Okay, thank you.
All right. On the ordinance itself, Andy, did you want to go to the 50-foot provision?
We can look, yeah, we could look at that. If you could scroll down, I think it's page 4. Oh, I'm sorry. I can do it myself. Let's see. So it's under number 3, and I'm not going to be able to read that. But basically, in the second sentence, it talks about public access points. And we've added the word lifeguard stands. And then we've modified the 50-foot. So it says 50 feet on either side. Well, it can't be within 50 feet of a lifeguard stand. And then when you're measuring the 50 feet for the access, what we're doing is we're drawing a line from the dune walkover or the footpath directly to the ocean, and you're going 50 feet north or south of that, and that's what the ordinance says. So it's not, it wouldn't be the entire boundaries of the property of the access. It would just be 50 feet from the walkway itself. And a lot of times you would have the Moby mats. A lot of the accesses provide the Moby mats, so the Moby mat would essentially be an extension of the walkway, and so you would go 50 feet north or south of the Moby mat.
May I ask another question?
Yes, certainly.
Would there be, is there some signage that's going to designate that? Is that the plan? Or is there going to be, are they supposed to carry a 50-foot measuring tape? Or what is the plan for that?
I don't envision the town putting up signs.
Our staff's hope would be that the board allows us to use our discretion and our ability to enforce this ordinance. Our hope is also that your expectation would be that of us, and that any sign, that you not evaluate failure based on 45 feet or 40 feet, or that, that if the woman that you showed the picture of is in a beach access, and that we can continue to maneuver around her, that we don't interrupt her and her family. Because the ordinance says 50 feet, that we're able to use some discretion and not relocate her. But that's hope that the board would allow us to use that discretion.
And who is the staff that's going to be making those decisions on a daily basis?
Well, the lifeguards, it's much easier for them in front of them. They can keep their, they've set their can and their fins out in front of them, and they're pretty easy to keep their path open. And it's easier for the lifeguards on the roving on the ATV to be able to illustrate the north-south. It's going to be much harder to be able to make sure that the tents are, that every day that there's not a tent, I can't tell you every day there's not going to be a tent that comes in conflict with this 144 square inches. But if it is, it's going to be hopefully readily identified, and we can communicate through the lifeguard to his supervisor to code enforcement, and code enforcement will call one of these guys and say, hey, what about the tent at, such and such location? The signage is too big. But I hope that the expectation is not on the lifeguards, that they're judged as failing their job if there's a tent that is in compliance. I don't intend to task the lifeguards with this.
But let me follow up with that. Any visitor and guest that does not rent from a concierge service can be within 50 feet. They can go and plop their stuff right down at the access and.
The lifeguards are going to move them. Hopefully they're there and they see it and they can move them before they set up. In front of the beach accesses, this would only apply to the vendors.
All right, thanks.
But I'm sure there's been times where the ocean rescue supervisors come over a beach access and somebody was in the way and they had to deal with it. You know, they had to, because they couldn't come onto the beach from an access, and they'll handle that.
I've never seen that. I'm just saying, you go across the access, you don't necessarily, if there's nobody there in the morning, you don't necessarily go left or right. Sometimes you just go straight ahead, particularly if you have small children and you know where the lifeguard stand
And
is.
you're right. I mean, if one of you go over a beach access and you see tents that are in that 100 feet, 50 feet on either side, that is going to happen. That's a possibility that that's going to happen. But it shouldn't be one of the vendors, and we should be able to regulate that much easier than we can general public. But again, this addresses the vendors.
But there is no intent to regulate the general public.
Well, that may come in further discussion, but this ordinance.
Going to talk
will not.
about that afterwards.
For the purposes of this ordinance and regulation of the vendors, part of the intent here is to keep a clear space around the beach accesses so that that's not essentially occupied commercially by vending, so that residents who come would be able to set up tents around the beach access. And so the vendors are going to establish what that 50-foot distance is themselves. And if they're wrong on one day, they'll get corrected and they'll be better. They'll do better on the next day. So, all right. On this ordinance, before we go any further, any questions or comment? So, I would ask that we dispose of this with a motion on the ordinance as it has been amended today with the definition and the 50-foot clarification.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, one opposed. All right, thank you. So now there was additional discussion, I think, perhaps among the committee members and the equipment vendors on related issues. Commissioner Fuller?
I just want to say briefly that when I began the process, or my process, I thought a lot of my issues were related more to vendors, and as I came away, I think I found out that a lot more of my issues tended to be not the vendors, but just guests bringing their own tents over. And I believe that if we look back at the recommendations that the committee came up with, particularly as it relates to the administrative part of the town in terms of removing tents on a daily basis. And when I say daily, it probably won't be a daily basis, but if we start removing the tents that are left out on the beach, and I'm talking about any tent that's left out on the beach, on Monday or Tuesday, it'll start cleaning up and taking care of our issues. In some research, you can look at some other towns, and that's what they've done. They've started early in the week after visitors come, and they remove a lot of the, quote, unregulated tents, non-vendor tents, and they usually by the Wednesday or so don't even have to go out on the beach because most of those tents are gone and not replaced. And I just want to make sure that we do remember in the budget process that I would hope that staff would be looking at making sure we have sufficient personnel, that we do remove the tents that are left out there on a daily basis, because I think the ones that are out there on a daily basis are not vendor tents, but they're individual, and they usually are the cheaper type tents.
All right, thank you. Any further observations on that topic? Commissioner Cahoon?
Not on that topic, but on tents in general, that when we issue crowd gathering permits or special events permits, that's where the wall of tents occurs in oh so many places. And that's where your commercialization of the beach signage is going to be hugely, but somebody just sent me a video about their event, and it was probably 10 tents, wall to wall. And that's something that we have said we were going to try to stop. So I hope that when people are applying for crowd gathering permits or special event permits, that we reiterate that you can't block the entire wall of the beach off as part of that permit, and that when they sign for it, that's noted that they understand those regulations.
All right, thanks. I know that, I believe in some cases, we've asked for a tent layout, like I think at Dowdy Park, perhaps. I know at least the fire staff is there to regulate how those tents are placed, and that would seem not to be any different to me.
I just happened, and the video was great, don't get me wrong, the event was great, but what drew my immediate eye was the wall of tents lining the beach.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sears?
Just to add to some of what Susie's saying, it's impossible to regulate everybody unless they're all licensees. You know, the vendors are actually doing a business, a vacationer just shows up. So how can we regulate both without forming some kind of permit process or going further along those lines, which would just cause more grief for the town in some ways, as I've been told. So overall, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time to clean up some of the safety issue at night and some of the remaining garbage during the day. And I think the vendors and education will help with that.
Great. All right, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Walters.
I'd just like to make a comment. I would like to say I really appreciate all the work that went into working on the ordinance. We had an ordinance, we modified it once, we've modified it again. I'm pleased to hear that the vendors are going to work cooperatively toward that end. I'd like to state that my concern is it is going to be, if there's something seen that is not kosher with the ordinance, it is going to be incumbent upon a lifeguard to recognize that, to report to his supervisor, to contact town staff member, the zoning compliance officer, to come down to the beach and say, move your tent. Again, the initial burden is going to fall on the lifeguard, and that is just a concern to me because I don't feel like that is their role. And in reading the recommendations from the committee that met, there's talk of a town-wide permit where, all that wasn't brought forward today, it is in the committee report that anybody that wants to set up a tent on the beach is going to could perhaps have to have a permit. Go online, get a permit before you can take your little $69 Walmart tent to the beach that you're using to protect your mom, dad, who may have just had melanoma, or your 1, 2, 3-year-old children who need shade. So I would just like to state that I hope that's not a path that we embark on. Tourism is the driver of our economy. If you look at our comp plan and the tourism numbers, 85% of the people come here for the beach. So let's don't make it hard for them. Let's just not even consider making it more difficult for them to enjoy what they do. And if we get too heavy-handed, people will go to other towns. I hope we don't get to the point where we already own the beach. The beach belongs to everybody. Let's don't charge them to set their tent up or set their umbrella up or enjoy their day or ruin their day by somebody giving them a ticket telling them that they haven't done something that they need to do. So I do appreciate the work of everyone. I just am concerned this is a little bit of a slippery slope, and I'm hoping that's not a path that we take in the future.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Thank you. Any further discussion today on this topic? All right. That brings us to new business, and I apologize. Let's take another short break. Let's take a 5-minute break if we can. Okay, thank you. We are back to order. That brings us to new business, and recall that we have moved item E8, E7 and E8 down to new business, and so let's start with those. And Amy?
Thank you, Board and Commissioners, or Mayor and Commissioners. So item 7 is a request for public hearing for the financing for what we are proposing to be the stormwater and the HVAC project. And this is a requirement by the LGC to have a public hearing. The stormwater project will have to be collateralized against something that we are financing with. So what we are proposing is collateralizing the fire building, having the HVAC financed, and that way they can be brought together to the LGC for financing. And then the reimbursement resolution, I did the others in July ahead of the financing. And because we did not anticipate having to finance the HVAC project, I did not bring that forward with the other projects. I did do a reimbursement resolution for the stormwater project, but I did not do one for the HVAC, again, because we didn't have the quotes back yet and we didn't think we would need to finance it. So this is just another requirement from the banks in order to procure financing. And I did go ahead and clarify with our bond attorney for beach nourishment, Scott Leo, and there is a requirement, I'm going to read it, there is a requirement to put a security interest in the property financed, and that comes from state statute 160A-20. So it is a requirement that we have to collateralize something that we're financing. We can't just pick whatever we want. So that is a state statute that I did confirm with a bond attorney, so.
One of the things we had originally said would we would put up the Barnes Street playground to do this, but this is cleaner because with the Barnes Street, it's not, we may have to get sign off from the Nature Conservancy in order to do that. So we decided to do this or recommend this.
Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
my issue was not with the public hearing. My issue was with the HVAC and the $90,000, because the last time I received any correspondence, it came in double the budget, and I have seen nothing since then to indicate otherwise. And I want to know where we are with that.
Well, we had initially in July sent out informal bids, and we received one back, and I wrote that down. I think it was, I didn't bring that with me. It was about 87,000, I think.
It was in the 80s. It
Yes,
wasn't
and so
90.
because we didn't have the money for it, and I think we just kind of didn't know where we were with it, we just kind of tabled that and let that go. And then we had sought some other bids with some vendors that we use, and that was again in the 80s, 81 I think. But we weren't comfortable with the way that the bids were sent out, so we're redoing it under the informal bid procedures again. But both bids came back in the 80s, which was more than what the engineer had originally he wasn't the contractor, but that was just the general quote he gave us. So we were all surprised when it came back that as well, but they're out for bid now under the informal bid procedures for the HVAC.
My concern is that we're limiting the scope of our advertising, that we need to broaden our scope.
I don't know how much broader we need to make it. We've asked most of the HVAC contractors in this area to bid on this job. Some said they would, they said they was gonna take time, but they would get bids back to us. It would take them anywhere between 20 and 30 days to go through it, and so Renee, I don't know how much more we need to do, but there are, again, you know, it runs in cycles. When the economy's not very good,
Everybody wants.
everybody will bid, but when the economy's good, it's very hard to get vendors that really want to work for us. And I know some of the reasoning behind it, but that's just the way it is, and I don't know what else to do. I mean, not, like I said, that's why we've reached out to even vendors in Tidewater now to try to get some of this work done.
Do we advertise or do we just reach out?
We reach out. I mean, we reach out.
So that
Advertise
limits.
locally, but reach out beyond.
I mean, we reach out locally. We call local vendors.
But how's it been advertised?
The original advertising, I don't know, because we didn't put it out.
Mine is not the reach out, mine is the advertising, because that reaches a broader pool than perhaps reaching out. And if we're only advertising locally, then we're not hitting the market.
The two that we have received, one came from Virginia, they both came from Virginia.
They
Okay.
both did.
Right, I can speak to the advertising.
Okay, thank you.
When this was initially advertised, it was posted on our website, and the company that we received a bid from was out of the Tidewater area. So we had gone through the informal bid procedures, and we had posted it on our website.
We're still taking bids till 15th? It coincides with the stormwater bids.
Yes.
15th.
It would be to the 20th.
20th
of December.
So we have more to get, and what I hear you saying is, don't limit yourself. Advertise further than locally.
Yeah, I mean, for big projects, I think sometimes we need to, and I don't know that our website necessarily is automatically, everybody's going to go look at our website.
Well, other forms of advertising that we have been taking advantage of are through the state interactive purchasing system. So we have advertised on that. We've done that with our recent drainage projects, as well as digital access networks. So there are some construction industry networks that we have tried to go ahead and reach out to with the larger, more complex projects. With the informal projects, that's a little bit more difficult, but you know, that's something that we can look at.
Just don't look, anyway, all right, thank you.
So we do need to move those two items since they were removed from the consent agenda. So a motion to, and we can have further discussion, but a motion to approve items 7 and 8, that would be E7 and E8 would be in order. And then if we get that on the table, I'll ask again if there's any further discussion.
Motion to move to public hearing, the adoption of a resolution authorizing the town to enter into an installment purchase contract, an amount not to exceed $800,000.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so I have a motion and a second. This is item E7 for the public hearing. You heard the motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, great, thank you. And item E8 is consideration of the reimbursement resolution. The motion would be in order on that one.
Motion to adopt the resolution as presented.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's some hesitation there, so let's talk about this item.
My concern is I don't think that it's $80,000 or $86,000, and I've reached out to a couple of other commercial vendors on the western side of Virginia, and they said that that would be a new construction price, not a reinstall price or an upgraded price, and that for that cost, he could go and put the whole system in brand new.
Well, we are protecting ourselves. It is up to, that doesn't mean we have, that's not the amount that we have to finance. So it could be 50,000 or anything under that. So when we get the bids back, the actual financing resolution that we bring to you in January and that will go to the LGC will be for the actual amount. But like what we did for Bonnet Street, for example, we don't, the bids won't be back before I have to send the financing quotes out. So I can do an up to, and then once we get those quote backs, the actual resolution will be for the amount, for the lowest qualified bidder. So it might be half that, I'm not sure, but that won't be the exact amount that we finance. It just protects us because I don't know what the bids will be.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead. Commissioner Cahoon?
No.
Commissioner Walters?
We have to do this.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, for me, it's essentially a housekeeping matter that has to be done to satisfy the LGC so we can do the financing. Is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, we have to collateralize the stormwater project. A bank is going to make us have collateral against the stormwater project, and
Thank you.
May I ask another?
Yes, sure.
I understand collateralizing stormwater. I do not disagree with it, but you're not going to tell me that HVAC is going to collateralize $800,000 worth of stormwater.
yes, I've also reached out to the bond attorney about this, and it's called, well, we call it the Don Ubell rule, and that was the partner at his law firm, but it's an interpretation is how big of a project it has to be to put a security on the project. And what they're saying is you can't just replace a window and saying that window is going to cover a $700,000 project. His rule was 100,000 as kind of a litmus test. That's not a statute. That was just kind of a general rule. But according to our, again, our bond attorney, his thought is that has to be a bona fide capital improvement. A bona fide capital improvement to the property, which could be more or less on 100,000, just depending on the circumstance. So that's not really written in the statute, but it's an interpretation. And they're comfortable that this would fit that bill.
And the bonds are issued for what length of time?
Well, it's just going to be a financing. It won't be a special obligation bond, but we are going to do it for 5 years.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Fuller?
It's not germane. My issue really is the amount of finance that we're doing vis-à-vis our assets. And at some, and we're regulated by that. I just want to know how close we're getting to those standards. So, but I can ask that outside of this particular thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any further questions? All right, we have a motion and a second to approve item E8, the reimbursement resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Thank you. We have one opposed. The next item on the agenda would be committee reports, new business item 1. And so I'll go down the line and ask if there are any reports. Commissioner Sears?
David reported on my committee.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cahoon?
There's been a new manager selected to run the GovEd TV network. Skip Wallace was promoted to that, so there will then become an opening for an assistant. But we had people apply from as far away as Florida, had lots of qualified applicants, and the committee recommended to the entire channel committee, which then recommended to the county manager that Skip be the one hired. He, granted, he had a few advantages such as familiarity, but he, in the interim, he had filled in and made a lot of advances with the channel that were pretty impressive.
I'm curious, you got pretty wide participation in the application process. How was that advertised?
Internet, listservs, it was advertised pretty much throughout the country. It was not limited to locally or this region.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Walters?
Nothing.
Commissioner Fuller? Okay, thank you. The next item of business is item I-2, a modification to the budget ordinance.
Thank you. And Amy can clarify further, but this is so that we can be consistent, the budget ordinance is consistent with the policy, the purchasing and budgeting policy that we kind of mirror with the state contract, or state standards. General statutes allow the change orders in the amount of $50,000, but our budget ordinance does not. So we are trying to marry the two.
We're asking just to bring some consistency to threshold amounts for all contract types. This will ensure staff has a clear understanding of all contracts needing to go to the board. And the other consideration is time sensitivity. Time is of the essence is in a clause in our contracts as well as liquidated damages. And we didn't want to get into a situation where the town would hold up a project getting completed on time or within a specified time period. So we're looking for consistency and efficiency.
Okay. Do you have a sense of where this standard would fall in relative to other towns, municipalities around and of our size?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But I can research that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cahoon, Sears?
Question, does this apply to new contracts or already existing contracts?
No, ma'am, it would just be change orders. So it would be to existing contracts.
So, and I'll refer back to the item we just discussed, the HVAC. If it had come in $50,000 over budget, would the board have had to see that?
You would see it in the form of a budget amendment, definitely.
After the fact.
After the fact. So technically, that $90,000 bid could have been accepted because even though it was outside the threshold of the budget, without knowing anything about it, except as a blurb as a budget amendment? Or the contract would have already been signed?
I can't sign a contract before the money's there. She
Right.
can't pre-audit it. So this would be more in line, no, you would not, I would not sign a contract that was above budget, without the board having first transferred the money to sign that contract, because she's not going to pre-audit it, a $40,000 line item for a $90,000 contract. This is more in line with a $400,000 project that was budgeted at $500,000, and there's a $50,000 change order, so it's still in budget.
Right, so that's the line.
However, it does allow on a $40,000 to change it to 50, add 50. What the request is, does allow that. May I? Mayor?
Yes, sure.
This is not really a staff issue. This is a board issue. The budget ordinance is created to put limitations on staff as we see fit and what we see as important, and to control the finance. We don't pass a budget. We pass a budget ordinance. And we pass that ordinance with certain key provisions because we see it's important that we maintain certain controls over certain fiscal aspects of the operation. Now, with that in mind, then we can discuss this. We're not discussing something that's a matter of convenience to staff. We're discussing what is our level of confidence in staff operating at a different level than what we decided when we created the budget ordinance.
I'm still confused as to how how the manager can sign a change order when there's no budgeted funds to pay for the.
And
Well, you can't even under this.
this item does indicate that there has to be sufficient
Right.
budgeted
So I
unencumbered
can't
funds. So
sign
we
it
can't
until-
just,
But the money can be in, it doesn't have to be in that specific fund. As long as you have funds available, you can change it and then come back afterwards and report to us, this is what you did. But you still have to come back and report, this is what you did. It's all a matter of what level are we comfortable. It's not a matter of convenient, it might be convenient to staff to do it this way, but the issue is, a budget ordinance is what parameters we set on the administration.
Not.
I'm not saying I disagree
I-
with the
I-
change, I'm just saying,
The change order would require a pre-audit.
oh yes, there would have to be
So-
money in the budget and, yes, I pre-audit all the change orders.
So I still fail to understand how I could sign a $50,000 without board. She's not going to sign the pre-audit until the money's there, and the money has to be there at board action.
then what's the request?
You can't move from fund to fund, though.
Correct.
You can only
I mean,
move within the general fund.
Right.
Right now, the request is to increase the amount of a change order the manager can sign.
If we have money in the budget that's unencumbered.
The request is not to move money without board authorization. The request is to sign a change order within but already determined budget.
Can I interject something? And what it does after doing projects, again, you're looking at this amount, and Cliff is right, and Webb is right. The money has to be there, but what it allows staff to do is, if, say we were doing a big project right now, okay? Tomorrow, the change order comes in, and it's a $40,000 change order. Without raising this limit, we have to wait to the next board meeting for it to be approved to go ahead with the change order. And what happens is the contractor doesn't want to wait that another 30 days for a meeting to be held, or you have to call a special meeting. So what this does on a big contract, it allows the manager to go ahead and sign a change order and let the project keep progressing.
And the amount now is $25,000. So what we're seeing is maybe $25,000 has become $50,000. And a $25,000 change order is not uncommon. So
Not on a big project, no. If a $25,000,
I'm not diminishing $50,000.
a $25,000 change order on the HVAC system, that would be a big change order. But on one of the stormwater projects, $25,000 would not be a big change order.
I guess where the board is, I'm speaking for me, but I'm saying the board. I guess where the board's coming from is that, first of all, we don't like change orders. Okay, change orders don't make sense.
Nobody likes change
Nobody should appreciate a change order.
And no one on this staff does.
And particularly the board that's responsible to the citizenry doesn't like to see a change order of that magnitude on a $40,000 project or $1 million project. So the whole point is, you know, we've got to trust that we're designing specs on the front end appropriately, because we don't want change orders.
You're exactly right, but some of the things, what happens now is here, especially on bigger projects, again, not on buildings and stuff like that, I agree. But when you get into projects like waterline projects and stuff, there's stuff in the ground that nobody knows about. You can have them flagged and stuff, and then I've done plenty of projects to go out there and find out that it was misflagged. So at that point, what do?
I guess my point is, you've already got a contract with an agent, okay? You've got a contract with the agent. He bid.
He bid on the
He knows what he
plans.
bid on.
Yes, sir.
If he runs into something unexpected, that's his problem.
I kind of
And
disagree.
he can't charge us any more money.
If he
Now,
bids
if we
on,
increase the amount and we just willy-nilly initial it and say, okay, no problem, then you know, then we're not being responsible.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, he bids on the plans that we provide him. That's what he bids the job on those set of plans. Now, if the engineer doesn't know, if nobody knows that there's something in the ground, I mean, be honest with you, we ran into this on the multi-use path over by the Quay Shopping Center. We ran into a power line that the power company didn't even know was there. Now, we didn't have to change it. They did. And at first, they wanted us to pay for it, and we said we weren't going to pay for it. And they finally did it. So, but that, they were looking at wanting us to pay a $25,000 bill to move a power line that they didn't even know was there. So, like I said, these things happen, and again, do you shut the whole project down to the next board meeting?
Well,
And we don't necessarily have to shut the program down. That's up to the builder to determine whether he needs to keep proceeding or he stop.
Well,
It's not us.
excuse me, I feel as though we're wandering afield from the question, because this issue of change orders, we have processes and procedures for contracts and change orders and how those get handled. It seems to me that the question at hand is, do we trust the town manager to make a $50,000 decision as much as we now trust him to make a $25,000 decision? A $50,000 decision is the equivalent of a hiring. I mean, we make $50,000 commitments from time to time, and the manager makes those at his discretion. And in my mind, you know, you have to trust that the processes and the contractual procedures that are in place are going to work before we get to this point of whether it's 25 or 50 or 10. So I'd like for us to come back to that question and ask ourselves, for the scale of projects that may be out there at some point within the town, are we willing to let the manager make a $50,000 decision? Commissioner Walters.
May I ask a question of Amy? Sure. How long has it been 25,000? How many years?
That's a great question. I don't know off the top of my hand, but I could find out probably.
A decade?
Or longer.
I'm trying to think, I'd have to go back to budget ordinances to know when it was changed.
Do you know?
I think it was probably, I don't know exactly, so take this as just a general thing. I think it was probably reduced back in the early 2000s. It was bigger. It was whatever the state allowed, and it was reduced because the board wanted more control.
Okay. I'd like to say that, you know, I mean, Amy's entire career is based upon her, you know, her degrees, her CPA license. I feel confident she's not going to do anything to jeopardize that. And likewise, I feel pretty sure she's not going to let Cliff do anything to jeopardize that for her. And I also feel confident if something comes up like this, he's going to let us know immediately. He's not going to wait and put that in an end of week, or, you know, that he's going to say, this is what's happened, boots on the ground today, this is where we are, this is the action I intend to take, do you have any problems with that? So I personally don't have a problem allowing this, because I don't think that's going to be done in a non-transparent way. So, or on any item that is not worthy or something that we have already budgeted funds for, so.
Thank you. I'll start down here to my left. Commissioner Sears.
One question for Amy. Amy, what brought this to the forefront and bringing this to our attention?
There's not one particular project or item that brought this to our attention, but as we continue to refine our purchasing policy and try to line that, you know, with the state statutes, we're just looking for consistency through this ordinance and our purchasing policy.
There's no change order I'm waiting to sign.
No,
And I don't remember the last time I brought a change order to the board that was greater than 25,000. I know I have, I just don't, I mean, this isn't a reoccurring issue.
Bathrooms at Dowdy Park.
Thank you, I knew there was one.
Commissioner
Which was a
King.
lot more than that.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Waters.
So,
We have-
say-
Yeah, the only thing I can say, I'm supporting it, but I don't buy the consistency thing. That's a non-discussion item for me. I think stuff like this should be presented in the budget ordinance, when the budget ordinance is presented. I don't like changing the budget ordinance wording about our values outside the budget ordinance. And so that's my personal feelings, that I want to make sure that we all know we adopt a budget ordinance and we had that number in there for a reason, or we should have changed it then. So that's my only thing, and I support the change.
Okay. All right. Is this motion on the floor?
I
Okay.
make a motion to approve as presented.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
thank you.
Excuse me. Mr. Town Manager?
We skipped this, attorney, but
The only report I
Oh, I'm
have
sorry.
is that we've been working
Yes.
with the town engineer on drainage easements to support your ongoing drainage projects that you have going right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yes.
I guess we could start the countdown to the 2019 beach nourishment project that's not that far away. And I've asked our public information officer to give a brief presentation to the board on our education and outreach, trying to make people aware of what's coming.
Thank you. Aren't you all looking forward to a much bigger beach next year? Perhaps we won't have as many issues as we have now. And our town and its livelihood will be a lot safer. See, have to learn how to do this up here. I know, I wanted to give you a quick update. It won't take a lot of time, but I also wanted to give an update that will also help people who are new property owners in Nags Head and visitors. So I just bear with me. I just want to go into a little background. We all know the nourishment benefits, but I just want to kind of reiterate them. It's pretty clear to us. Provide a higher level of storm protection, much wider recreational beach. We're going to address the south end of the Nags Head, of town of Nags Head, and actually erosion all over our beach. This project, I'll go a little more into it, will integrate dune management in 2019, unlike the project back in 2011, which was a little different. We're going to replenish the sand deficit in our sandbox. We'll maintain Nags Head's FEMA eligibility, which this is a huge one, as you already know, because we're about to get, we've already started receiving reimbursements for about to total $16 million as part of this project. And it aligns with a long-term plan. Okay, just go a little bit back. As you all know, we're nourishing 10 miles of beach from Bonnet Street public access south to our town line with the National Park Service. There's a map on the website. I'll discuss that a little more. I didn't want to go into numbers too much. They're big and they don't mean a lot to individual property owners. You need to put it in explain it differently. But the regular nourishment project will place 2.3 million cubic yards of sand, and in the Hurricane Matthew restoration project, we'll replace 1.4 million cubic yards of sand. So that's 3.7 million cubic yards of sand. Back in 2011, we placed 4.6 million cubic yards of sand, just as a comparison. The preliminary schedule, obviously although we've worked on this for years, it's a little early in the process to know what the schedule is at this point, other than the contractor said they anticipate starting in April or May. If you remember back in 2011, they started May 24th. So they need to wait till the nor'easters calm down a little longer so that their dredges can work efficiently in a wave climate that we have here. The schedule will be available at nagsheadnc.gov, our website, and at morebeachtolove.com. I'll go into that a little more as well. Periodic progress video updates will take place during this, construction. I'll go into that a little more as well, too. It's just some background. I'm sorry I don't have it. I did this back in 2011, but it still holds true. Forgive me, it's kind of rudimentary. But as you know, we'll be using hopper dredges. I've heard that we're not going to have the two hopper dredges, right? We're not going to have the one that just sits offshore, a cutter head dredge. We're going to be using two hopper dredges. That means there will be dredges that go back and forth from an offshore borrow area, will sail to a underwater pipe and discharge the sand through that pipe up onto the beach, where bulldozers will shape the sand into our beautiful new beach that we can enjoy, everyone can enjoy. As I mentioned earlier, these are the 4 reaches. Reach 3 was, since 2011, was broken down into a north section and a south section due to the varying erosion rates down in that area. So this is just another map, and that's where the beach building will take place, and I believe there's a little in Reach 4 as well, dune building.
I'm sorry, I think Commissioner Cahoon has a question.
The taper was due to end on the Park Service, is that correct? Or not?
Yes, that is. It's going to be more of an abrupt taper this time
But it goes all
around.
the way to the town line, because the last time the end of town did not get beach nourishment other than a slight taper.
Correct. Yes, the taper goes farther. It's just, I'm sorry, it goes to the town line. It did last time, but they should be getting about the same amount of sand, or is it a little more? Same amount of sand as last time. It's just
To
that,
get more.
They're getting more.
They're getting more.
They got a
They're getting
bigger-
more at the
That's why I
sand.
They
want to
have a bigger
clarify.
taper.
no, the taper's smaller. It's more abrupt.
The point is, people should know that it's not going to be a taper. They should know that it's going to be a whole lot more sand that they're going to get.
Correct. I
It's a
promised
pork
Roberta
chop.
she wouldn't have to answer the technical question. But yes, the sand will fill right up to the town line instead of tapering further back.
Full project to the town line.
Right, and we,
Have we had any discussion with National Park Service about allowing the taper to go on their property?
yes, we have.
Do we have an agreement?
No, we do not. David? We've had discussions, Cliff.
Yeah, we've had that discussion about going further on, and they would allow it. It's just a matter of we're not permitted to go further for this project.
The sand is going to go there,
Yeah, it's gonna go.
but doesn't it go to like a straight-out stopping
Correct.
point, which is ultimately going to taper onto the Park Service?
Yeah, we did discuss, okay, well, can we nourish further onto your property so then the anchor is more stable? The taper is on their property, not ours, but we're only permitted within the town limits.
But I believe that we had talked to the Park Service, but in the time frame that we had to get this project done, we weren't able to get that agreement in time.
So I just don't want at the last minute to say, we can't do what we need to do.
This, as designed, is permitted and under contract to be built, like we just told you.
Okay.
Do you have anything you want to say?
Just a couple points of clarification that I wanted to provide the board. All right, so for the 2011 project, there was an end taper section, and that's typically how you end a beach nourishment project.
That's right.
In this project, that taper has been shortened. So before it was like this, now it's more abrupt. You still have to have a taper section to end a beach nourishment project, but they have increased the amount of sand that they're using there in Reach 4. And just to throw out the numbers, is for the original project, there was about 115 cubic yards of fill density in reach number 4. For this project, we're looking at 144 cubic feet of fill density. So there is an increase there at the very end of the project.
Don't go anywhere. This is what you can expect. Typically, and we have a brochure that we're starting to hand out now. This is on the FAQs on both our website and the morebeachtolove.com website, which is how we're branding beach nourishment in Dare County. You can expect to see about 1,000 feet in length of beach affected. And typically in front of the house, the beach will be closed for 24 to 48 hours. However, there could be up from 3 to 6 days. There could be construction going on either part of that next to that house. The area could still be closed for equipment storage, but construction should only be in front of a house 24 to 48 hours, and that's obviously if the dredge does not break down or the weather does not change. It's 24/7. The beach bulldozers back up, and they're the backup alarms. That's people will be able to hear that. There are some lights used at night. But after the beach is built and you go through that pane, it's huge, and you have, sometimes the pipes will still remain on the beach, but they'll have sand walkovers so you can get on the other side of the beach to the ocean. And as well, if you rent an oceanfront property, just because the beach nourishment happens to be right in front of your property when you're visiting, you can still walk around the closed area and enjoy all you want on the beach. And usually on one side of the area will be a huge new beach for people to enjoy. David said, I never miss a chance to explain equilibration. I don't. This is one thing, a hard lesson I learned back in 2011. The beach during a beach nourishment project is built abnormally wide, because our natural wave action will smooth the beach out to a gentler slope. This is supposed to happen. It's not a loss of sand, it's a redistribution of sand. So about 2/3 of the material will slide underwater, and it'll become the foundation for our beach. And what I like to say is that then we'll have offshore sandbars where the waves break on the sandbars and not on our beach. That's a really important point, because some of you may remember a lot of people had questions about that after 2011. This is just another rudimentary explanation of what an equilibrated beach looks like. And equilibration typically happens with storms, and sometimes I think in 2011 it happened very quickly thanks to Hurricane Irene, which came in. Just a little background on the public reach that we've worked on. We started with public meetings well back in April 2017 that were held in this room and across the street. I spoke to the Outer Banks Association of Realtors, a general membership meeting back in 2017. That was about 200 people at that meeting. At that point, we didn't know whether we were going to do it in the summer of 2018 or 2019. However, I always spoke and said there is a chance it could take place in 2019. I won't go over all of these. We even did a current TV, already did a video update in May, letting people know that this was coming down the pike. I spoke to the realtors again, the property managers this time, in October, and I recently spoke to the Village of Nags Head's property owners meeting. It was interesting when I asked them if they had been around in 2011 for beach nourishment, just about everybody in the room had been around then. This is the brochure we're just beginning to disseminate, and again, this is we're attempting to brand this as a county-wide effort, so that people are no longer confused about where they can get their information from. Dare County's been really helpful in keeping their morebeachtolove.com website up. It's pretty seamless. There's a link to the Nags Heads project right there. We'll share information with them. Next video update we'll be doing with Current TV will be January, February. I'm going to start advertising here towards the spring, targeting different audiences. First our property owners, and then the visitors that come in. And we'll use all the methods. Andy and I were discussing that we really need to get a newsletter out, we were thinking about just a letter, but a newsletter, we've got a lot of information coming down the pike for our property owners. We'll include it in a newsletter this spring. Working right now on Destination Dare video that we can use on our website and all of our social media channels. And talking to Great Lakes right now about getting someone interviewed who can be a part of that video. And Current TV has agreed to produce progress updates like they did up in for the other beaches this past summer. We'll probably do progress updates every 2 weeks, and those are just video updates. I can be on the beach doing updates as often as needed, and I'll update the website as much as possible. We're going to have a little more control this time around. Progress updates, I'll be using in the left-hand corner Google Maps, just like the other towns used last year, and that way I can update the progress much quicker instead of waiting for an engineer to tell us an update or to create something that looks nice. They're the two websites that we are using to get information out. Obviously, you can watch the Board of Commissioners meetings and presentations. I've started to do a little social media already to explain to people. A lot of people have picked it up. I see they're sharing it with their friends. We have almost 400 people on a Town of Nags Head beach nourishment specific email broadcast. And this is just for beach nourishment for this summer. So they're mostly visitors. I'm going to migrate that email broadcast over to our new mass notification system so that they can get text messages if they'd like them. And that's it.
Glad that you've been really proactive. Are you sending out all these websites to the Property Managers Association? Because the number one question I've had all fall long is, when's it going to start? Where's it going to start? And which way is it going to progress?
You can send them to me, yes. Those websites have been in use, and we were even included on the More Beach to Love website 2 years ago.
No, I'm asking if you sent
Sent that to the property owners.
Property Managers Association so that they can disseminate it on their website to their property owners and therefore their renters.
Yes, I tailored this to you, but this is essentially similar to the presentation that began given, yes. They absolutely, and it's on here, it's on everything. But if you have any other ideas of how to get to the property owners or the Property Management Association, to the best of my knowledge, they were all well aware of it. But maybe there's an outline.
Regularly, and you could ask if you could make another presentation.
Yes, I just met with them in October, and I would talk to Willow about meeting with them again in April. At this point, there's not a lot to say other than it's taking place this summer.
Okay, because all the contracts, that's the question everybody's being asked. Where and when?
And then the third one is, does my insurance cover the cost?
That's correct, because everybody's going to want adjustments. No, I'm aware, but timing is everything, and that's what everybody's concerned about.
And the where and when is difficult at best, as we learned from 2011, because my thinking was they'll start at the north end and work their way south till they're done, but they didn't do anything close to that, nor will they this time. And you remember we very little notice that they were coming when they came, because Great Lakes got pulled off a job on a Navy base in Florida because they were taking too many turtles. Unfortunate for them, fortunate for us, because that sped up our project much faster than we anticipated. So I think the best we can do is just share the information as soon as we get it, because we don't know exactly when they'll be here, and we don't know where they will start. They started at 4th Street, if you remember.
That's not where they wanted to start it, but I'm glad they started there.
And that's a game time decision almost.
Right. That's in addition to equilibration. That was the other lesson I learned hard in 2011 was even if they give you a schedule, it will change and it will change often. And I tried to impart that with everybody else.
The thing that people need to understand, we can try, and believe me, Roberta rearranged many weddings that summer for brides that were the most terrified about the project we're going to ruin there. So we can do to the best of our ability, but we don't know for sure what direction they're headed.
And there will likely be, I glossed over this, there will likely be 2 sand discharge areas. So that means 2 closed-off areas because we're going to be using, we're going to have at least 2 dredges on the site. And that was the same as in 2011. We had the Liberty Island hopper dredge working the north end of town and the Texas Cutterhead suction dredge working the south end of town.
And that is the point I was trying to make. We don't want to dictate where they go and how they go because it's their construction job. That, if we start telling them where to be and when to be there, then the cost just goes through the roof. It's we turn the construction over to them, and then they have a window when to start and when to finish. Other than that, there's not a lot we can say or do.
That's right.
It's probably already been said, but, so the property managers will have links that they can put on their website if they want, that will, let everybody know approximately when they're in the area.
Yes,
And as it gets more refined, I think it was a little more specific of where they were each day, once they begin the process.
That's correct. And they already have that, that's why we're still using the More Beach to Love. The property managers are very familiar with the More Beach to Love. They liked how it worked. They also already have it, and maybe Commissioner Fuller will know, I know that they use a lot of apps these days now instead of a handout to somebody that walks in, and it will be in there. That's already, I've been told it was already in apps already on the phone.
I know the environmental organizations were going to provide the ability to track the ships offshore that were towing the sonar for the acoustic testing. I mean, we'll have to be able to have an app that shows us where the dredge is at any given time.
And there is, marinetraffic.com can tell you where the dredges are, but unfortunately, it's so, it depends where the submerged pipe is, because, the dredge could be down the offshore Barrow area, and, yeah, you're right, there would be a nice...
It'd be fun to watch.
I'll sit on the beach if you'd like me to with a
That's
GPS.
okay. All right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Roberta. Appreciate that. Just keep pushing that information out there.
Mayor, the only other thing is a request for closed session to discuss the acquisition of real property located at 2620 Bridge Lane and 205 Cuddy Sark Lane in accordance with GS 143-318.11, Bowlegs A, Bowlegs 5.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the request for closed session?
So moved on the appropriate statutes.
Second.
And a second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The board will be in closed session. Okay, the board is returned to open session. I would ask our attorney, Robert Hobbs, to report from the closed session.
Thank you. With respect to the property at 2620 Southbridge Lane, Nags Head, the board will not be taking any action on that at this time. And with regard to the property at 205 South Cuddy Sark Lane, the board has, in closed session, given direction to the town attorney to further negotiate terms of that purchase with the seller.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. It is 1:25. The board will be in recess until 3 o'clock, at which time we'll complete our meeting and then proceed to the workshop.
3? What
Well,
time do you say?
Well, it's 1:30. Is an hour enough? 2:30?
Hour's fine,
Okay. All right. I'll change that. The board will be in recess until 2:30. Thank you. Okay, thank you. The board is returned to regular session. Next item on the agenda is the Board of Commissioners agenda, item L1. Commissioner Fuller.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy will probably be presenting most of this, but what I'd like to do is just maybe frame something, which is, I know the board previously, and I think mostly previous to this sitting board, but some board members were here, have discussed a number of things about what I want to talk about, but on commercial sites, we have required open space on certain commercial sites. And my question to staff is, what is allowed in those required open spaces in terms of coverage? That's one question. The second question really centers along the lines of, we have a building setback area, and my next question, which is kind of harder to describe, but outside the building setback area, we have what could be termed like green space or open space, or open area, not open space, but open area. And my question really involves what sort of signage and what sort of storage, what is allowed in that open area? And I believe in my discussions with staff, and Andy or the manager can correct me if I'm wrong, but the board has changed its value so much over so long a period of time that it's very difficult for staff to really have a good wrap around what is being allowed and what isn't being allowed. And I could give some examples if need be, but what I'm just talking about is basically what is being allowed in that open area, and what isn't. And do we as a board see that as an issue, and do we want to ask staff to do something? So with that, I'd just ask Andy to maybe brief you.
So we have had a number of discussions about this, and we attached some of the background history on this to the packet. For those of you that aren't aware, but the board in 2015 had a retreat in September, and one of the topics of the discussion was how the town should look. And so a large part of that discussion dealt with things that were being stored outside of the building, usually in front of the building, next to the right-of-way. In a lot of cases, businesses were storing merchandise or displaying merchandise in various areas, as Commissioner Fuller describes, and that still exists today. At that time, the board had a lengthy discussion about it, and then asked the local business committee to talk about this issue. And local business committee spent some time on it, and you have those minutes and presentations that were given to the local business committee. They talked about, how the town looks, what looks good, what looks bad, how far does it need to go for it to look better. They even talked about ordinances that the town could consider to better regulate the outdoor display and storage of merchandise. We showed the local business committee several ordinances, and at the end of all the discussions, the ordinances were fairly complicated. The local business committee decided it would like to reach out to the businesses, explain what the board's looking at, define the problem, and ask for some voluntary assistance in cleaning up some of these areas. The business committee even invited several owners of the businesses or managers of the businesses to a meeting where we had an open discussion about it. Those business owners obviously did not want the town to adopt regulations, but suggested that they could work with the town to try and provide some better compliance, or at least make the town look a little better. So we sent the letters out, and we saw the results of that. Some areas improved, some areas improved temporarily and then sort of reverted back. And I think over time what you see is a little bit of creep of some of the storage and display of merchandise back towards the road, becoming more visible over time after the initial request was made. And that's really where we stand. In regards to the questions Commissioner Fuller asked about what the ordinance allows, we'd had discussions about this, and there are several different provisions of the ordinance that could come into play. There is a definition of open space in the ordinance, and it's tied to several other definitions. One of those definitions is commercial transitional protective yard, and that is what we really refer to as a buffer between properties that may be different uses, like commercial use abutting a residential district, we typically require, fairly dense buffer between commercial properties and residential zoning districts in order to provide adequate screening. And so the commercial transitional protective yard is a required open space. And in that required open space, they're not allowed to place any structures. And it uses the term structure. And, I think that, obviously there's some interpretation that could be made over what's a structure, what's allowed, what's not. I mean, I think we could take the position that nothing is allowed in that commercial transitional protective yard, but typically that's not the area we're talking about. That would be the area either between the properties or behind the property, but not typically the area out front. Years ago, we had some provisions in the code. You recall this from the whalebone seafood proposal that we talked about. I don't know if it was this board or the prior board, but the prior board considered an amendment to a site plan for whalebone seafood, and that was so old that it fell under this ordinance we had in, I think, the late 80s, where they were required to dedicate open space to get a certain number of points. And I think, you could argue that that dedicated open space, you wouldn't allow anything in that. But there's only a handful of properties that were required to have that other dedicated open space. But some of the properties we've looked at, like with the local business committee, the areas in question wouldn't fall under any of those provisions. And I think staff's position on all of this is that in order for us to effectively deal with the problem, if there is a problem, that we would probably need a more clear ordinance to go by than what we have now. We don't have an ordinance that deals directly with the outdoor display and storage of merchandise. Several communities that we looked at do. I mean, it's very specific to what we're talking about. And so I think that's what we would prefer to have in place if the town decides that, or the board decides that it wants to pursue regulating these activities. So that's my update on this.
Yeah, my basic point is because we've changed the buffer ordinance along the main road or the frontage to more of a landscape ordinance, so we don't have that buffer thing, bless you. What we're seeing is, in my opinion, a lot more creep of just storage, what I call storage, but other people, I also call it signage. And the real test to me was when we had the storm. Which storm was it?
Florence.
Florence. All of a sudden, I'm riding down the road, and I'm going like, well, man, this is what we've tried to create. I mean, it looks great. And then all of a sudden, I realize why. It's because everybody took all that stuff in that's been sitting along the bypass, and the town looked really good. And then after that, it's starting to creep back out again. And from my perspective, I just think it is something that I would like staff to look at. If the board doesn't see it as an issue, then we can just move on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start down at the other end with Commissioner Sears.
I have nothing, no comments. We're,
Commissioner Cahoon.
The background reminded me again of the local business committee and what they thought. They thought tidying up needed to be, but they didn't see an issue, and then it became, in some cases, of what one person didn't like, another person did, so it became kind of a value judgment instead of a one-size-fits-all approach. So some people did clean up a little bit, some people did not, but the board never pursued it per se, other than we did have a meeting we invited all the businesses in. Everybody came in and stated how they ended up where they did. For lack of a better term, Ace Hardware sometimes had a lot of stuff in the beginning of the spring when they had their merchandise in, and by the end of the summer, it was gone pretty much because they'd sold all their inventory. Some people just used it as a storage area, and some people used flags to their advantage to try to gather attention. So, but there were no recommendations per se made by the business committee to do any further steps.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Walters.
Well, I think the business committee studied it quite extensively, and the decision was made then to send letters to the businesses about it. And I don't see it as a huge townwide problem. There may be 2 or 3 businesses who have a fair amount of merchandise outside. I would prefer to see us just talk to those businesses about it and see if, if there's any options for them to store some of the stuff in other places. I know one business was addressed because it was a fire code issue. So I'm not sure I see it as an issue that needs, a new ordinance or perhaps a heavy-handed enforcement.
Yeah. I would like further discussion, and not today, about this issue of what we envision the town looking like and what this board has in mind for what that vision is, so that we all get into agreement about what the sort of the limits are.
That's what I was thinking.
I guess I'm a little regulation weary today. I think that there are mechanisms. One, I think continued communication is. I think that there always needs to be the potential for regulation out there as a hammer. But I also would like, this is something I've been thinking about for a while in different contexts, but one of the things that we don't give here is an appearance award, like a lot of communities have, as a sort of a major issue. And I'd like for us to offer that partly as a carrot while we're in the process of communicating and trying to determine how we want folks to tighten up. And a couple of the criteria for the appearance award can be that the business doesn't display merchandise outside and doesn't use flags for advertising. And really narrow down that kind of vision that we have for what we want something to look like, and incentivize it if we can find a way before we decide that we need to crack down on them. But I think part of that begins with us having a full discussion with some illustrations about what we think is an acceptable level of outside display, somewhere between none and what we see today. And so I might add that discussion, if I may, to the retreat and ask staff to pull together some, and we can do this too as a board on both ends, is to gather up some images of what we think. We don't have that drone yet, do we?
Mayor,
Yes.
the business staff did a pretty thorough job of providing the business committee with pictures and overheads.
Okay.
So I would
Okay.
think we still have those. And they had pretty much from one end of town to the other.
Okay. Can we get that then, please? That would be a good starting point for our discussion.
We do have a drone.
Well, if you already have overhead images, that's fine. I'm just thinking, this is down the road. If we ever got into a discussion about, what's an acceptable percentage of your open space to cover with outdoor furniture or whatever it is, then that may be useful. But, that's a more detailed part of the discussion after we get past the kind of the value discussion about, is it some or is it none? And where is it?
Okay. We would be happy to follow up with some of businesses we've talked to in the past, if the board wishes us to do that, just to talk about appearance and make suggestions about.
I think before we do that, I'd rather for us to see the images and have the board discussion at a time when we have the opportunity for adequate give and take with things in front of us where we can say, well, is this too much, or is this too much, or is this the right amount, or is this the right amount, or anything.
Okay.
So we can have a meaningful discussion. Is that enough discussion for today?
I wanted to bring it up for discussion. I think we've got discussion.
Okay.
I'm kind of hearing that there's probably not a strong value to do anything. Really, I mean, I don't want to go through an exercise to go through an exercise.
Okay.
But, I mean, I have my value as a board member and as a citizen, but if it's not a board value, then I don't see a need to go through an exercise just to go through an exercise.
Okay. Well, let's table that for right now then. I would still like to see a copy of that report, though, if I could.
Okay.
And I think if it's in an email form, just go ahead and email it to all of us anyway.
All right, thank you.
That brings us to, are there any other commissioners with issues that were not on the agenda? All right, so we come to the mayor's agenda. There is a very preliminary January 2019 retreat agenda. I would invite you to review that and share any additional items that you feel may need to be discussed. We do have a date for this, and I believe we have a facilitator.
We do.
In place for this. So I look forward to, a couple of days of constructive discussion. Of course, I was just on board, Webb was just on board, Mike was just on board last year. We've talked a little bit about this. We'll have to spend less time with kind of onboarding exercises, and we can have more discussion on meaningful topics. So that's all.
Our dates are 24th and 25th, is
Yes,
that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Maybe we offer a couple now?
Yes, of course.
One, I don't know if it's under the beach nourishment project, but at some point in time to discuss the tax districts for beach nourishment.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to add that at some point in time.
It was, and we talked with staff about that yesterday, and I do think that we were going to put that on there for as much discussion as we thought we needed. So, yes.
And then the other question, which I'll bring it up, but do we need further discussions about tents on the beach, those that aren't vendor tents but are individual tents, or is everybody satisfied with not discussing that?
I'll look to the rest of the board. What do y'all think?
I'm looking for staff to enforce the rules that we have in place, as well as make aware of those special events. If there's, and I would hope that staff would also contact the real estate companies that are providing tents, that if they don't adhere to the 144 square inches that we have for commercial, they would probably be next in the crosshairs. How's
Okay,
that?
that's pretty good. So in that case, then that would be no. I'd like for us to live with the season with the rules that we have, and let's see how things go, and the enforcement that we've asked for. I think we're gonna be happier. So
But I do think we need to enforce the rules that we currently have as well.
100% agree with that. I think that's when you have them and you don't enforce them, that always leads to the next issue. The 2019 meeting calendar, and whether we need to modify this with regard to the January meeting, whether we want to stick with January the 2nd or move that meeting. What are the board's wishes?
Move that meeting
You would?
to the 9th,
Okay.
because staff will be out of office for some holiday time, and I think it will just work better for all of us if we change that by a week.
And I'm fine with doing that. I probably will not be here.
I will not be here either.
Oof,
Well, I'd say that changes that.
that does change that. So that probably leaves that alone. Unfortunately. We'll just deal with it.
Leave it on the 2nd?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we
I said, I
get,
mean, yeah, I'm happy doing it, but
We can't do it with two commissioners not here.
yeah,
can.
Huh?
Yeah, you can.
I know we can. I don't want to do that. I
can
don't.
we ask that materials be got to us,
Including backup.
including backup, before the 28th? Because then they're closed that Tuesday, but we don't, as a board, we don't get stuff until the Friday before, which is 28th, and staff is already out 3 days that week as well.
We can get it.
Well, get it to you the 27th, that late the 27th. Okay.
Or the Friday before.
How are you going, what's the point in giving it to us on, no offense, I'm not trying to be argumentative, but after you've been out for 3 days, you're not going to have everything organized. If you're missing something, then it's going to be, if you got it on the 27th, why can't you have it on the 21st if you're going to get ready to be taken off for 3 days?
You want it on the 21st? I'll get it on the 21st.
Let's do that,
Okay.
and we'll just do whatever we have to do to make that happen.
No offense, but.
Carolyn didn't think
Understood.
I'll get it on the 21st.
Okay. Thank you. Any other dates that you see on that calendar that need to change? Let me check one thing, excuse me. I didn't think about this till just now.
I did look at the 4th, and it's okay.
May 11th. Okay, no. All right, if there are no other changes. You all received a copy of a letter that I wrote to be over the names of Bob Woodard as the county board chair and I about the seismic testing. And worked on that letter on Saturday and shared it with Bob. We went back and forth on it a little bit Sunday afternoon. This was originally intended as an editorial that would be directed at the News and Observer, and it has been sent to the News and Observer, and they have not yet decided whether to publish it or not. We've not heard from them. Chairman Woodard chose to share that meeting with his board and the press, appropriately so, on Monday, so it's out there. I think one of the things that we need to do, one thing that I believe that we should do is send that letter to our North Carolina representatives, our new senator and representative in the North Carolina House. But the larger strategy needs to be that we make this more of an issue for the state of North Carolina, and that we try to ask them to get as many legislators on board, so that the state, so that they can join the governor in opposition to offshore testing and drilling. Whether we'll be successful or not, I don't know. But I think we just, I've said this at some point in the past that we're just going to have to keep shouting at them until we're hoarse. And just keep pushing back. So.
How about our federal representatives?
And our federal representatives. Representative Jones has been on board with us, fortunately. But yes, our senators also needed to be on board. So we will send that letter to all of them. The last item that I have are the annual gift cards for staff. It's been the board's custom in the past to give $100 gift cards to all full-time employees, and I believe $50 gift cards to part-time employees. And this would be another recognition. I talked about this staff that we have today during the Employee of the Year Award discussion. And this is really just a token, again, of how much we appreciate them. So I don't know if
We had it in the budget, did we not?
yes,
I think we did, yeah.
yeah. So I don't know that's not something that y'all vote on, that we vote on typically, is it? Or is it?
I think that it's in the budget, and the money we give them is for work performed.
Okay,
I don't think we're allowed to give money away.
okay,
So it would be for work performed,
okay,
and it's already in the budget.
okay, good. Thank you.
When it wasn't budgeted, we had to vote on it. but
I
it's-
see. I understand. Thank you. I appreciate you making that, clarifying that for me. Is there any other business to come before the board today? Yes, Cliff?
We have a budget amendment and a interlocal agreement we need to get board authorization on.
Okay. All right.
But could we have just 2 minutes?
Okay.
Finish up the typing.
Yes, certainly. All right, so we'll pause here. I'm not going to use my gavel. We'll pause. Okay, the last item on our agenda is a budget transfer and interfund loan agreement. Cliff?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Town Clerk, for making those on-the-fly adjustments. The two items that we placed before you, one being a budget adjustment or budget amendment request, and the other interfund loan agreement. And this is to coincide with the request to discuss the acquisition of property that was previously mentioned for the potential purpose of acquiring those. The budget amendment would transfer funds from appropriated fund balance to Nags Head Leasing Corporation Fund, maximum of up to $115,000. That would be one item. The other would be interfund loan agreement, and this would take place as of today with the transfer of those funds no later than December 15th.
So what would happen here would be that Nags Head Leasing, which is a separate nonprofit corporation, would basically negotiate the purchase of the property in Nags Head Acres that was previously discussed. And they have a separate board, and they would approve that, but this loan would provide funding for that entity to acquire the real estate.
But at a later date.
Well, it would acquire it, within the time frame that the seller was expecting.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
then once, then the town could elect to purchase the property from Nags Head Leasing at a later date on such terms that they agree upon.
Okay,
So
great.
this would
Thank
not
you.
be an acquisition by the town from the seller of the property. It would be a loan to a separate entity called Nags Head Leasing Corporation, and then Nags Head
Order to
Leasing
purchase.
Corporation would need to take action to accept the loan as well as negotiate the purchase of the contract with the seller.
All right, thank you. Board members, do you have any further questions about this? Okay, you've heard the resolution, seen the budget amendment. A motion would be in order.
So moved.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
So I have a motion to approve the budget transfer and the interfund loan agreement. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you very much. That concludes the business of the agenda today. We will adjourn to a recycling workshop at this time.